Hey, everybody, welcome to the Sharpening Report. I'm excited to be talking with you this week. I wanted to do something special this week. So, I have a four-part series on Gary Wayne's new book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy 2, Part 2. And we did a complete four-episode series, and we released the full episodes of all of that at dailyrenegade.com a while ago. So, what I wanted to do today, and also, I came down with something. The family's been sick. I haven't been able to record a new episode this week. But I thought what I wanted, a good idea would be to take all of those and put it into one big compilation for YouTube. So this is the full four-part series, and every part, it's the full video, not just the first half. This also gives you at home, if you're not a member of Daily Renegade, this gives you a sneak peek on what massive amount of information you're missing by not being a member at dailyrenegade.com. So as you're watching this, think to yourself, isn't it kind of worth signing up at dailyrenegade.com and having access to all of this information right when it becomes available? Not only do you get full episodes, but you get early access. You get to take part in the community tab, which is a big fellowship for all of us Christians to get together and talk about our favorite theories or ideas or whatever you want to talk about. You can be rest assured that you are free to express it there at dailyrenegade.com. So enjoy this, and then next week and the following weeks, I got a couple of really interesting interviews for you and some more really cool stuff. But again, you get early access to that, and you get the full videos if you become a member at dailyrenegade.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe, click the bell for notifications, and make sure that you are subscribed. A lot of people, YouTube has been just unsubscribing people. So go ahead and make sure that you subscribe to us. It really does help a lot. Okay, so without further ado, here is my massive four-part series with Gary Wayne on his brand new book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, Part 2. All right, enjoy. Concerning the economically unstable times that we live in, it is a great idea to convert some of your savings into real money. Now, there is a big difference between real money and what we call money, which is actually just currency. So our dollar is currency, which fluctuates. Real money, on the other hand, like silver, for example, is a store of value over time. The best way to think of it is like this. If you had saved $1,000 in cash back in the late 60s, the late 1960s, that $1,000 would still be $1,000 technically, but it would buy you significantly less today due to inflation. Now, if you had saved that same $1,000 in silver back in the 1960s, today it would be worth around $28,000. So one of the best ways to protect your purchasing power is in real money, more specifically, silver. You can buy and have the metal shipped discreetly to your door, and what most people don't know is that you can actually convert your IRA or even a 401k into physical silver rather than having all of your life savings tied up in the paper fiat system, which is subject to hyperinflation. Go to dailyrenegade.com and click on the Cornerstone Assets Metals banner. This is the only company that I personally trust with this kind of thing. Click on that and sign up to get your free silver report today. One of the financial experts will speak with you to find out the best way to protect your savings going forward in these uncertain times. Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Tonight we have a very special episode for you. We are welcoming back to the show, finally, Gary Wayne, author of The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind, and The Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Helps Define End-Time Prophecy. And that second book will be the topic of tonight's show. Glad to have you back, Gary. How are you doing?
Doing well and staying very busy and very happy to be back on your show and to, talk about my new book. So, yeah, very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. And I'm I've been looking forward to this book for years, and I know a lot of people have. You put so much work into the first one, and even though it's a large book, it's still easy to read and understand, so it's not intimidating. Like the chapters are short enough where you could read 2 or 3 chapters in one sitting pretty easily. Can you give us a brief overview of this new book and how it differs from the first one?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I said I would never write a sequel to the Genesis 6 conspiracy. In fact, I'm 300 pages into another book.
Wow.
And I set that aside because of all the feedback I was getting for, from Christians who saying, we really like the Genesis 6 conspiracy, but we would like to have an author who could go really deep into the Bible and talk about similar things, but specifically targeted at Christians because, as you know, most churches don't teach prehistory and they don't teach prophecy, so they're not getting the whole context. And one of the things that people really liked about the first book is they said, it gave me a worldview that I didn't know about before, or as much about as I should have, and it also made the Old Testament come to life. So I didn't want to be redundant. So I had no real interest in writing more what I thought might be about the same topic, but it's the audience that convinced me. So as unique as the first book is, book two is just as unique and in different ways. And whereas in the first book, I let the spurious forces or the evil forces speak for themselves. And I'm drawing from all sorts of outside sources. This book only draws from sources outside the Bible that really sort of supports the important aspects of the Bible. And so it's targeted at Christians. And so this book goes deeper than any other book into the Bible. And it goes deeper in a way that will help. It won't reimagine the Bible. It will make sense of the Bible, I think, in a lot of ways for people. So it goes very, very deep into everything it says about the giants, the demons, the hybrid races, the angelic order, the rebellious angelic order, and how all of that is explained through the Old Testament that provides language for understanding end time prophecy. And then I'll transition from that with all of that information and then review all of the wars of the giants in the Old Testament and make sense out of that in a way that people haven't really seen it before. They get a glimpse of it in the first book, but not like in the second book. And then in the last half of the book, I take those terms in that context and I lay down a end time biblical chronology using that context so that people can fit prophecy into place. And it's like I say, it's very, very unique, and it's targeted at Christians, and it's going to make people think, whether it's from prehistory or in prophecy, to maybe have another look what the Bible has to say.
Fantastic, man. That sounds absolutely awesome. I want to get right into it. You open the book with the days of Noah and the giants of old. What can you tell us about the giants, and why are the days of Noah such an important time in history?
Yeah, it's one of those references that shows up in the signs that Jesus provides for his second coming and the end time events. So it shows up in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and then you get references and details on that in Luke 17 and 21, with Luke adding the days of Lot as part of that whole allegory for understanding the end time. Now, what's interesting about the word days of Noah is it's the exact same words that that the Bible uses to describe in Genesis 9:29. And Noah lived 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood. And the days of Noah is an overarching sign. It's part of three overarching signs of the end times that Jesus provides, and it immediately follows the fig tree generation. So there's a specific generation where all of those events that he discusses are going to be fulfilled. Heaven and earth will pass away, but his words will never pass away. And the other overarching sign is the birth sorrows and how that affects the end time. So all three are that overarching context for the events described in the fig tree generation. And so when we look at the days of Lot, it talks about, a godless nation, which was at the time of the flood. It talks about, you can make an inference to people carrying on and not carrying, thinking that the flood was coming, and there's violence. And of course, in Genesis 6:1-4, you get the introduction of the giants as the preamble to the flood story and the context for that violence. And that we're guided to learn about the days of Noah and all of the days of Noah. And there's giants both before and after the flood. And that it is somehow connected in the allegories to what happened in the time of the flood and the time of Sodom and Gomorrah, that is going to be akin to what's going to happen in the end time. So that old adage that the Bible talks about in the book of Ecclesiastes, where you have nothing is new under the sun, what was will be again, is something that we need to understand in context of what Jesus is providing us. So it's a specific sign. And, in the first book, I make a pretty good case for a technology and a society that was advanced and perhaps more advanced than what we have today, that we're just catching up to be like the days of Noah. So we need to understand everything that was going on, both before the flood and immediately after the flood, and how that is going to affect us in the end times. So we have giants that show up after the flood, and they're understood as the Rephaim giants versus the Nephilim giants. So I'm going to make a distinction right out of the gate between the difference between Rephaim and Nephilim, and talk about the post-Diluvian giants, which are the Rephaim. Nephilim only shows up 3 times in the Old Testament in Hebrew, and that's once in Genesis 6:4 and 2 times in Numbers 13:33. And in 13:33, that's the embellished part of the report that the terrified spies or scouts are trying to terrify Israel for not going into the land of the giants and taking the land of the covenant. And they actually succeed, but these aren't Nephilim. Even though it says the Anak are the children of giants, and it says that sort of twice, and that word goes back to Nephilim. The Anakim were not Nephilim, and they were giants, but not Nephilim. And we know that there were Anakim in the covenant land, because earlier on in the report with Joshua and Caleb, and then again repeated in Deuteronomy 1, we get that testimony that you have these 3 Anakim kings, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. And in Deuteronomy 2, we see a description of these giants in that period of time, like the Emim, like the Zamzuzim, like the Horim, and the Anakim are listed as giants, but that's the Hebrew word Rapha, 7495, or 7497, rooted in 7495. And so we get Raphaim used 25 times in the Old Testament versus 3 times. The only other time giant is used is in the book of Job, and it goes back to the Hebrew word Gibor or Gibborim, which is the word for mighty one used to describe the Nephilim in Genesis 6:4. And we get Rephaim used 2 times in the Old Testament, translated into English directly as the Rephaim in Genesis 14 and the War of Giants. And then in the Mighty 10, that's talked about in Genesis 15, and the land being promised to Abraham by God. And then the other times where you have Rephaim that comes out of the Hebrew, or Rapha, Rephaim being the male plural, it's translated as giants. So the Old Testament is talking about giants in terms of Rephaim and not Nephilim. But what the Numbers 13:33 passage does, describing Anakim as the Nephilim does, it tells you the veracity and the fear that the Israel had for the antediluvian existence of these giants, that they would use them to terrify the Israelites, what they were going up against. So this is a story in book 2 about the Rephaim giants, the beast empires that they're going to create, and how that's affected our history and how that's going to affect the end time.
Mm. Yeah, and that's an important distinction to make between those 3 words, Nephilim, Gibborim, and Rephaim. And another 3 words that you bring up in the book, too, that many people might not know, the differences here are demons, devils, and unclean spirits. What are the differences between these things?
Yeah, that's interesting because you have those three terms that are used interchangeably in the New Testament in the accounts that Jesus is describing on his encounters of what we sort of commonly understand as demons. And so, you have like an evil spirit and an unclean spirit. You could look at that as being a demonic spirit, or you could look at that as being a fallen angelic spirit, or maybe some sort of other counterfeit spirit that's created. But because they're used in conjunction, and you have the translation in the King James Bible as devil, it gets a little bit confusing. And it's that word devil doesn't go back to diablos in Greek as what it does when it's being applied to Satan. It goes back to daemon, the root word for demon spirit. So these are demon spirits that are possessing people and hurting people that Jesus is exorcising. And Legion would be the most famous of that. But we don't really get a significant explanation for who these demon spirits are that Jesus is dealing with that seem to be inferior spirits to fallen Nephilim or the fallen ones, fallen angelic spirits, and Satan Diabolos. And that when you look at the definition for Diabolos, you have Satan described as being that individual, just as that's part of his name in Revelation 12 as a serpent and dragon. And he's the prince of the demons. So somewhere the demons fit into this hierarchical order, only of the spurious ones, only of the fallen ones. And these are the visible ones that when we're talking about the demon spirits, at least they once were visible, that were doing things on earth for the fallen ones. And so when we look at who these demons are, they appear to be, and I make a good case for that, these are the disembodied spirits of the counterfeit spirit created by fallen angels that went into the giant's physical body and soul of the physical world, and then merged with this counterfeit spirit. Just as the Bible tells us, there's three aspects to our body, and it has an oikateria in the soul and the body from the physical world, and then the spirit that comes from heaven. And then when we sleep, that spirit goes back to heaven. And my understanding from all the wording in the Bible is that spirit sleeps. So that's different than soul sleep. Soul is an expression by polytheists of the physical world because they don't want to recognize where the true spirit comes from. And so, yeah, these are beings that we need to understand what they're doing today in preparing for the end time, how they're going to affect the end time, but we also need to understand where they came from and how they got to be there. So in the book, I'm going to talk about beheading and decapitation. And just as Goliath had his head taken after he was killed with a smooth stone, that seems to be the only way to ensure the giants are going to stay dead. And in the execration texts of Egypt, the worst death a royale could have is a beheading. And there's numerous cases in secular history and within the Bible of beheadings of people because they're afraid that they may come back to life. In fact, in the time of Jesus, in the time of Herod, the tetrarch, and John the Baptist, he ensures, Herod does, that John's head is taken. But you can imagine then, with this understanding of what the polytheists understood about giants and disembodied spirits and them coming back, when he hears the miracles of Jesus going on in the Galilee Valley, he's terrified. He thinks it's John the Baptist, and that somehow he was able to repair himself or resurrect, and he's absolutely mortified that this could be the case. And so this beheading is something that I'm going to cover off in a significant way so that people understand why that's part of the giant mythology and other occult genre. But this was a an understanding that the giants had the ability to reproduce, or not reproduce, but to repair themselves. And that comes from the root word 7495. And that means to heal. And it's Rapha as well. And it is the root word for 7497 for giant, and it's also the root word for 7496, meaning evil spirit, shade, shed, demon spirit, all words like that, which are the disembodied spirits of the giants once they've been slain or their body has died. And 7495 means that there's something in a connection either as with medicine, a technology, or somehow an ability to heal, because all of these words are reflecting the partial meaning to understanding the Rephaim giants. And the Nephilim would have had more gifts, I think. I think the post-Diluvian giants are smaller and they have less gifts passed on. And so 7495 provides an insight into books like, are you still there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, you just froze up was all. So,
Oh,
and
sorry.
so that's okay. And in the Ugaritic text, which is written in Old Semitic, the root language for Hebrew, we get the Rephaim accounts. RPM as it would be in Old Semitic, Rapiu or Rapium as it's transliterated into English out of the Ugaritic text, are created by the Baalim after the flood. So now you're into a Ugaritic parallel story for the creation of the giants that show up in the flood after the flood, and that they're doing rituals to Baal and Ashtaroth to come back because they have an issue. They have a fertility issue. And they're doing fertility rituals to create more Rephaim, but of course they can't come back because just as their parent gods like El before the flood, who created giants, doing the same crimes would send them to the abyss prison or the pit prison as well. So they're no longer walking amongst humans, but they're looking in the assembly of the Baalim or the assembly of the Dat Tanu, the Tuatha De Danann, the Dedan, the tribe of Danu. They've got a whole bunch of different names. I cover off all of those names in the book. So this is the assembly of the Tanu, and this is an assembly of the giants with the Rephaim are part of, just as GBR, a tribe of the GBR, which is in that application referring to likely a tribe of giants, or at least of mighty ones, are part of that assembly as well. And what's interesting about the Rapium and the Rapiu in the Ugaritic text is not only did they have the ability to heal themselves, but they could heal others. And they were the kings, and they were the warriors, and they were the giants, and the ability to go back between the underworld and the physical world. So as we start to relate that to what we understand in the Bible, and that the Baalim ruled over all of the land of the covenant, including Mount Hermon and including Ugarit, we get this understanding coming out of Ezekiel 32 that we also cover off in the book. And this is just to give how much, sort of an inkling into how much information there is on the giants. They're called the terrible ones in Ezekiel 32. And Isaiah 25, they're the branch of the terrible ones that are going to be dealt with in the end time. And the terrible ones are these ones that are speaking to Pharaoh from the sides of the pit. And they're distinct from the mighty or the El, the fallen angelic ones in the pit prison. These are ones who did horrible things to humankind and were slain on the earth and now are in the sides of the abyss. And the terrible one goes back to the Hebrew word erit. And erit, or as in terrible one, the plural would be eritim. And you get all of these descriptions of like giants as strong and powerful and stout and things like that, but also childless and infertile. And not from producing seed, it's from producing females. That seems to be the issue because we don't get a lot of accounts of females, and they need more females to reproduce. And that infertility is going to force them so that they don't go extinct to reproduce with the humans, where the hybrids are going to come from, and all these different hybrid nations. And one example of that is Timnah and Eliphaz. in Genesis 36 outside the Table of Nations, which is really important understanding as well. And Timnah is the daughter of Seir, a Horim, another kind of Rephaim giant, and listed as giants in Deuteronomy 2 as well. And so this term of the terrible ones, Arit, is the root word for the city of Ugarit, being the second of the compounded word. And so UG seems to be, because King Og was not only king of Ashtaroth and Edrei, also mentioned in the Ugaritic text, but seems to be Og's original city as being the last of the Rephaim. And that goes back to the Hebrew word Ug, which is UWG, or OWG, sorry, and goes back to its root UWG, which is, take the W out in the vowelless sort of understanding of Old Semitic, and you have the city Kiriath, which be city as in Kiriath Arba, city of Arba, the patriarch of the Anakim, Kiriath Ug Arit, and that's city of Og, the terrible one, who ruled over the Raphaim and the Rephaim at that time by the looks of things, or at least as part of that whole assembly. And then after the War of Giants in Genesis 14, once most of the Rephaim tribes were wiped out, I think he migrates over there because biblically he's king of Edrei and Ashtaroth of the Bashan region of Mount Hermon. And he's going to be king over the Amorites when the Israelites show up. So that gives a bit of an insight as the connections to these beings, and that the word shade, these are the spirits of these disembodied spirits in the Ugaritic text, and that the physical ones that are still living are actually going to parade them into the underworld in funeral processions in the Ugaritic text.
Hmm. And any discussion of giants, Nephilim, this kind of stuff, I have to ask because I've always been curious about this, and there's a lot of theories going around about it. And I'm not sure if I'm even fully settled on one or another. But in your opinion, how did the giants return after the flood?
Yeah, you'd say there's three different buckets on that. I lean for second incursion. I think we get a verse that might infer that in Genesis 6:4, but it's not a smoking gun verse. So I leave the crack open for other options. But I think a second recreation by the Baalim, or the offspring gods, after the flood. And to understand prehistory, you have to understand there's a flood. And it doesn't matter which accounts that you're reading from, that is a dividing point. And you have parent gods like El from the Canaanite pantheon ruling before the flood, just as you have Kronos and Gaia ruling before the flood in Greek mythology, and that would be in Zeus and the Olympian gods, or offspring gods, that would rule after the flood. Baal rules after the flood as the offspring or the son of El, who ruled before the flood. And it's the same account. They take over and kill all the parent gods. I don't think they do. I think the parent gods went to the pit prison. And I think that's where the offspring gods go as well, for the ones who commit the same crimes after the flood. And so I look at giants that are showing up after the flood as being Rephaim as we understand them. And that has, in the occult, one of the names associated with Baal. And Baal, and it's Raphael, it's got several different variations. And just as Satan had multiple names, all the fallen angels have multiple names and titles. And so I think that's kind of one of the titles that passes on and likely creates a giant named Rapha, who's not listed in the Table of Nations, just as Arba is not listed in the Table of Nations, because none of the Rephaim patriarchs are listed in the Table of Nations, which now explains why you have 9 patriarchless Canaanite tribes. And I'll trace those back to Rephaim names in the new book as well. And so I think that is a better way of making sense of the Bible, that you don't have to worry about some of the conflicts and issues and some of the words. Now, I do leave open the understanding, because we don't have another identical verse after the flood for the creation of giants, that giants could survive the flood. The second bucket would be somehow with the help of fallen angels. Just as God knew that the fallen angels were going to create the giants before the flood, he knows they're either going to recreate them after again, or help some survive into the post-diluvian world, or both. And so that could be on an ark. It could be off the earth. It could be in the earth. And in the Epic of Gilgamesh, we have the creation of Gilgamesh, 6th generation after the flood, son of Lugalbanda, king of Uruk, and the female mother goddess Nin. And so that's a second incursion. So is Enkidu. But Upnapishtim, whom he goes to visit, is the Sumerian Noah in the giant survival story on another ark. All of these are classified as 2/3 God and 1/3 human, including the whole family of Upnapishtim. So you get both there. Deucalion in Greek mythology, and Pyrrha, again, Deucalion being the Greek alleged Noah, he's the son of Prometheus, saved on an ark. So he's another giant. These are giant survival stories, and one of the possible ways that angels could have helped. The other bucket is the third bucket. Oh, and just before I pass on to that, in Genesis 6 and 7, you could make a legal argument for survival based on God was going to destroy everything he created. And the distinction there is God didn't create the giants. That's the fallen angels. So if you wanted to make that legal argument, you could do that. I still think things fit better with a second incursion than this, but again, I'm open to that. And then somehow on the ark, what that means is the Gnostics believe Ham was a giant. All 3 sons were a giant. Everybody on the ark was a giant in the different accounts. Some believe that Og, as in Jewish mysticism, was a stowaway or was hanging on the edge of the ark and survived that way. Some, as in the last Noah movie, has that as Tubal Cain. And then there's another version where it could be part of the wives' DNA that would show up after the flood, and it would show up into the Canaanites. But then again, they would have a patriarch if that was the case for the 9 patriarchless tribes. I think there's a DNA thing going on the ark, but I think that's the wives carrying the DNA from the 4 races, as opposed to the giants. So again, I'm open to that, because we don't have, again, that smoking gun verse as to how they show up. So those are the ways. My preference is second incursion fits better with what it says in the Bible, and then other accounts that we have that come out of closely related to, like the Ugaritic texts and all the other polytheist accounts. But I cover that off mostly in the first book, but I do give some examples how it relates to second incursion in the second book.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that to me makes the most sense too. The second incursion, it's the simplest one, And a lot of times when you read through the Bible, a lot of people overcomplicate it, and when you really look at it, it's like usually the simple answer is most often the the way to go.
Well, and when you dig into the Hebrew of the creation of the giants, and when the sons of God go to the daughters again, that is in like manner at a different period of time, and it's inferring that there was multiple creation of giants before the flood, but it also, by the language, would indicate after the flood. But again, it's just not quite there. Now, I just did, a show with Doug Hagman, and he thinks it is the smoking gun. And so we agree almost to that last sort of 1%, but I'm a contrarian, so I need a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely understandable. I'm with you. You had mentioned names and titles, and this is something else that you write about in the book too. What are the differences between Satan, Hellel, and Lucifer? Are these all one entity or different entities? How do you view these names?
Yeah, so they're referring to the same individual. And I know there's a lot of people have a view in Isaiah 14 that Lucifer might be a Nephilim or another angel or something like that. I tend to put everything around what Jesus said first. And let Jesus be, the defining thing on all things that we have that he talked about. And so in Luke 10:18, it says that Jesus saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. And it's describing what's being described in Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, and elsewhere. And so not only is Satan called a devil, but he's also called a serpent and a dragon in Revelation 12. So he has sort of multiple aspects to him. And in Ezekiel 28, he's described as a cherubim, an anointed cherubim that walked amongst the fiery stones. Cherubim don't do that. And you have seraphim that do, are six-winged serpent-faced angels that work as ministers that Isaiah 6 talks about. So that gives him something unique. He's cherubim and he's seraphim and archangel and probably high priest based on the 7 jewels or the 9 jewels that he had. And just as the Levite priests have 12 jewels, just so I don't leave that sort of dangling there. So he has many positions, titles, and names, and we don't know how many names. The book of Enoch might suggest another name called Gadrael. Gadrael was in the Garden of Eden, just as the cherubim was. That means wall of God, as you take that back to Hebrew. Even though we don't have a Hebrew manuscript, that's how you build that name up. Or God's wall, if you wanted to translate it that way, just as Raphael would be God heals or healer of God, depending on how you wanted to translate that. So in Isaiah 14, you get this verse that's talking about Lucifer as the son of the morning. And in Hebrew, it's Hellel ben Shakar. And so that's Heylel, which typically an angel has at the end of his name an El, like Michael or Gabriel. And typically the Bible would translate Michael and Gabriel directly as the name and not the meaning. But somehow there's a confusion here, I'll put it that way, as to how to deal with Hellel. And the King James Version translators used Lucifer, which is understood from Latin from several different words meaning Venus and light and words like that, and as the morning star. Well, he's not the morning star, and that's not the translation there. Jesus is the morning star. This is Hellel ben Shakar, Hellel, son of the morning. Now, he may be part of the morning star order as well as the other orders that he's in, just as you have the morning star order in Job 38 with the sons of God celebrating at the time of creation. And I think that's, again, part of his titles. But Lucifer is a Latin word inserted for a Hebrew word into the English language, which is the god of the Freemasons. And that just makes no sense to me. And neither does the Daystar translations for the other translations as well. And I think it should be translated as Hellel. And he's the god of hell. And I'll make a case etymologically that you can make a case that that's what it's referring to in part as one of his titles as Hell-El, as the god of hell. And also will break down that hell is a conflated term in the Bible that adds to confusion. You have to understand it as different places. And to me, it would be better translated whether or not it is Hades or Sheol or the lake of fire or the other meanings that it has attached to it, as opposed to just one conflated term. And I think it helps dismiss it as being a real place when they do that. So Hellel is another name that people like to use, as that's the reference to the king of Babylon in Isaiah 13 and 14. H-E-L-E-L is not H-E-Y-L-E-L. It is an allegorical derivative as it's defined, but we don't get Hell-El anywhere in the Bible as translated into English with that as a Hebrew word. So when people look at Hell-El as being a Nephilim type of character, I think that might be possible, but as it relates to the king of Babylon, because the king of Babylon never raised his throne to heaven. Tyrus never walked amongst the fiery stones in Ezekiel 28. So you have something called a dual prophecy here. And I'll talk about this in the new book as well. And it's important to understand specific passages. So a dual prophecy has distinct characteristics. It has information in prehistory. That's important to understand the Old Testament and important to understand end time prophecy. It is a prophecy, as in Isaiah 13 and 14, in the period of Isaiah and in the time of the beast empire of Assyria. And that's why you have the Assyrian in there. And Assyria is basically an empire that's coming out of, Babylon is an empire that's coming out of Assyria, and the king of Babylon reference as well in Isaiah. So it's a prophecy for Isaiah's time, but not all of those details were fulfilled in Isaiah's time with Assyria or Babylon. But there are details reserved for the end time. And it's those details that are incongruent with the prophet's time that we can use for an analogy of the end time. And in this case, Antichrist raising his throne to heaven in Daniel 8:10. And in this case, the Assyrian being killed on the mountains of Israel in Isaiah 14. And so Ezekiel 28 is a similar dual prophecy. And there's a number of those dual prophecies I'll cover off in this new book.
That's really interesting. It's amazing how the Old Testament and all this historical stuff can connect with prophecy. Something that you mentioned, which is really interesting, is the position of high priest in the angelic orders. And this is something that came up in my research too, when I was looking into the Dead Sea Scrolls and things, is that they had an understanding that there's the earthly temple and everything that happens there, but there's also the heavenly temple. But it's not just a place for God to sit and nothing happens there. There's heavenly temple rituals as well, and there's angels in positions, and we even see that in the Bible too, like in Revelation 8, where we see some of these things happen. What can you tell us about the hierarchy of angels and what positions there are?
Yeah, there's a sort of a standard chronology, not a chronology, but a hierarchy that's out there. And Dionysius is a church father that put most of this together. And so I cover off the hierarchy in the new book. And the first thing we need to understand is that the angels are a host of heaven. And that's the Hebrew word Saba for an army of angels, implying rank and order. Now, when I looked at Dionysus' model, it's not easy to understand or follow or prove biblically. And he's got several different names for the same orders, just as in the New Testament, you get a confusion of like dunamis and exousia being conflated into powers into English, right? So you have to sort of be able to take it back to the original Hebrew and the original Greek to get the different angels and sort of assemble the order. And it also in Dionysus' hierarchy, you have the archangels placed in the third hierarchy with principalities and angels. And so that doesn't make any sense to me either, because archangels are around the throne. They're like part of the four groups of watchers. And Dionysus doesn't really account for who the thrones are and where they come from. And so I sort of dig into all of that. So the four watchers, I put four watchers at the top, and they will be over a column of other angels. And I put this hierarchy in the Bible, and I walked through the different Greek words so that you can understand the different words that, let's say, dunamis or exousia are being translated from, and it can be translated in different ways into English. And it's going back to the same word, or arca for principalities, for example. So I begin with the four watcher groups. So I move the archangels up to the watcher group, and they're around the angels. And I even move up a possibility that four archangels might oversee the four columns of angels in the hierarchy, just as you have four sides to the throne. where the angels will assemble themselves. So I divide the hierarchy up into governments, religions, armies, and thrones. And leading that would be the seraphim in two groups of the governments and the religions. The seraphim being the six-winged fiery serpent angels that work before the altar. I also have archangels up there, and then I have the cherubim and the Ophanim as the same group. I'm open to the idea that the Ophanim may have a separate pillar as well. But typically they're kind of used together. And if people aren't familiar with that term Ophanim, it's in the book of Enoch as one of the four groups of watchers. And we don't get that word translated into English, but in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10, we get the throne, the chariot of God, as in the vision of Ezekiel. And it's got the cherubim. And then in the book of Psalms, it's the cherubim that are pulling the chariot of God, the throne of God in that visual and vision context. But then you have these wheels, part of the chariot, and wheels within wheels. And within those wheels, you have a cherubim-like angel, but distinct because it has a face of a cherubim. We're not told which face, or maybe it's all four faces on the one face. We don't know. But it's different, but it's cherubim-like. So the wheels that are being talked about in that chariot, when it's referring to the wheel, that's the Hebrew word Gilgal, as in, base camp Gilgal, where Israel had their base camp, or Gilgal Raphaim, the wheel of the giants, at the foot of Mount Hermon. But when it's referring to the angels within the wheels, the one with all of the eyes, that's the Hebrew word Ophan. And then you put the male plural on it, Ophanim is where that comes from. So I have the archangels overseeing the army aspect of heaven, and then the cherubim and the Ophanim over the thrones. And then you have, I'll just use the English terms. So the seraphim and the governments, you have powers below the seraphim, and then angels. The religious order there, you have the principalities under the seraphim, and then messenger angels. Archangels, you have the mighties, which are also two different types of mighties that are listed, whether it's Icarus, which is the revelation term for mighties, and then angels underneath, and then thrones and dominions. So it's the cherubim and Ophanim, which are the thrones, and underneath are the dominions and the angels. And they're representing the throne rooms. And so when we now have the counterfeit army, the counterfeit host that Satan sits above, or the council of gods in Psalms 82, he's going to counterfeit the same hierarchy. And so they're going to rule over the 70 nations that Deuteronomy 32 talks about. And this is the same 70 nations that were counted by the sons of Adam before the flood. So Deuteronomy 2 is very similar to a dual prophecy, giving us prehistory, the time of the Exodus, and then some implications as you would roll forward with Jacob inheriting the children of Israel title, Yisrael, which is a compound word for, the sons of, as in children, Ben, Israel as being the sons of the ruling God, is one of the, I think, the closest translations you would have, or the ruling mighty most high God, as in El Elyon. And I cover that off in detail as well. But you have these 70 nations, plus you have this council of gods, and you have the 7 wandering stars. So Satan has his own throne room on earth that sits above the council of gods, and I think at Mount Hermon. And then you have the 7 wandering stars who have their throne rooms. That is, I think they would have a certain number of nations under those 7 stars, probably 10, making 70 nations. And then each of those nations would have their own throne room. And then as they create junior offshoots from that master nation, there would be throne rooms above that. So you can imagine multiple layers of this coming down. And just like the archangels in heaven have an army, and they're the ones that are going to do battle with Satan's army. There's an army leg as well that we see manifested physically on earth with the visible ones as well, with rank and order. So you have physical thrones representing the invisible ones who rule this earth. You have their army. Every aspect of that ruling hierarchy and infrastructure is represented through the thrones, the governments, the armies, the religions, and the courts.
Mm. Man, that is so interesting, and something that you mentioned too, and obviously we can't cover the entire book today. I wish we could, because I could listen to this for hours. But there is something that I have to make sure I get in here, because I saw you have some sections available on your website, and you have the chapter list, and one of those chapters is the unicorns of Mount Hermon. What are the
Yeah.
unicorns of Mount Hermon?
Well, it all sort of fits in once you start to peel back the layers. So you have this word, that unicorn, that is understood in the occult as this mythical, happy little chimera type of animal that doesn't get on the ark because it's playing. And it's a big part of the occult, but not just as that physical presence, but something greater. So the first thing to understand is unicorn derives from the Hebrew word rem, for wild bull. And so unicorn should not be in there. And it's an occult mythos that's been overlaid. Now, it could be a single horned bull, sure, but that's not the occult representation of the unicorn. And the unicorn is part of the coat of arms of the mighty Prince James. Mighty is in Gabor, Prince James, sponsor of the King James Version Bible, and his proposed world empire that he and his descendants were going to build through the Stuart dynasty. So you have a unicorn and a lion that's on his coat of arms. And everything on a coat of arms is taciturn language for their genealogies back to specific patriarchs, as in Rephaim and Nephilim, and to specific godfathers of the celestial mafia, fallen angels. And so that's part of the imagery, and where unicorn has been inserted, it's there to expand his mythos, so to speak. And so it's also used in relationship with Mount Hermon. And so unicorn, in the standard physical world mythos, was the horse that Nephilim and Rephaim used to, in a different format after the flood, would ride into battle. And again, it has a single horn, and it is this chimera type of horse. It has multiple different parts to it. So it's involving some sort of angelic technology, some sort of DNA manipulation that we're just catching up to, that they had in the days of Noah. And that this unicorn horse is, the horse that's represented on the king, on the Windsor and the Stuart, and the double unicorn on the Hanover coat of arms, from which the Windsor's original name was Hanover, as they replaced the Stuarts. And so this is an understanding that we need to understand, that if it was a chimera animal, and the mythos is that the unicorn missed going on the ark, it's because it was not pure in its DNA. It wasn't called to the ark. It wasn't playing. It was this horrible, powerful animal that could kill an elephant with its horn. It was that big, and it was huge because the giants were huge. But that's not the only meaning it has. And that single horn also is the single horn understood in the occult as the unicorn single horn of the beast empires that rises amongst the 10 kings in Daniel 7 and the single horn in Daniel 8. And so this is sort of saying, in their language of how they use this, is that Prince James saw himself as an antichrist type figure that was trying to create a world government, or at least through his bloodline descendancy, and a possible bloodline for the antichrist. But in the larger version of this unicorn, it's thought to be an angelic being. So now when we get into Greek mythology, you have like Zeus and Apollo and other gods and goddesses who have this chariot being pulled by these white horses, flying white horses. And in some of them, they're unicorns. And so this is the throne of fallen angels in the physical world, just as it's a counterfeit of what's being talked about in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10, where the cherubim are pulling the chariot. And so these in the occult allegory are fallen cherubim. And the unicorn single horn is the third eye, that this special knowledge is passed on from the heavenly realm to their followers. And so when we look at how the occult tries to immerse us in everything and tries to corrupt everything, we need to understand that they have a long-term plan to deceive Christians in the end time. And we need to be aware of all of these allegories and things that they believe. And it's not, and it is what we've talked about on a couple of shows in the past, it's not whether or not I believe everything they say that's important. It's that they believe it, and it's what they're doing with that belief system that we have to be aware of. And they're the ones that are trying to bring in the New World Government, the universal religion, and to bring in the Antichrist.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, and that's why stuff like this is so important. Well, we only covered the first 2 sections of the book, and we barely scratched the surface on those. And there are 7 sections in total. So, again, unfortunately, we don't have time to cover the whole book. But I do want to know what do you want most for people to take away from our conversation today?
Yeah, what I'd like people to take away is to have a hunger or a passion to curiosity to dig deeper into the Bible. Because if indeed we're in the end time, if we're in the fig tree generation, then the size of the deceptions are going to be so great we can't imagine it. And that even the elect will be deceived if that were possible. And Jesus warns that it is, that even the elect would accept Antichrist as the Messiah. That's how large the deception is going to be and how convincing it's going to be. And that unless Jesus stepped in, no flesh would be saved. So we have to understand this, and then we have to understand it in how it means for us in terms of the tribulations that we're going to go through, and what that means in terms of when Jesus is coming. We're only promised 2 things by Jesus. One, we're going to be saved from the wrath, which is the year of the Lord's wrath. And the other is that we're going to be saved from the hour of trial. And that hour of trial is that time of Antichrist rising to power. So we have to put on the full armor of God, and we do that by not only having strong faith, but having enough knowledge within the Bible to take on the arguments and the deceptions that are going to be specifically targeted to break down that faith and to lead people away from God and into the hands of the globalists and the Antichrist.
Amen. Well, when is the book out? Where can people get it? And how can people follow you online?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the book for the excerpts are out on my website at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. So I have a generous excerpt of book 1 of all 98 chapters, and I have a generous excerpt of all 84 chapters of the new book. And so people will get a good feel for it. But like the first book, even though there's a generous excerpt, it is a small piece of the information that's coming at you in this book. It's written in the same manner in little mini stories that lead into the next chapter that keep adding information to the narrative as the book unfolds. So you can read a chapter at a time or a couple chapters or flip around anywhere that you want to do it and come back. It's written in that sort of way. So on my website, you can pre-order the book. It's got a release date of March the 12th. It's a date that we hope we're going to beat. There's a shortage of paper out there in the publishing industry. There's a shortage of printers, and there's a shortage of labor. So publishers have to put out a date that they have to meet. If they don't, then retailers, particularly the very large ones, will punish that publisher. So you have to meet that date. So we're hoping to beat that date, hoping to have the printed copy available as soon as I have it. I'll be shipping the books. So you can pre-order on the website. You can pre-order through Amazon.com. You can pre-order through BarnesandNoble.com right from my website. I have links over there. Kindle version isn't out yet. The digital version is already in Amazon's hands, so there will be a digital version, but they haven't released that yet either. But they may release that sooner as well. So that's the easiest way to get a hold of my book, find out about my book, and to pre-order the book. And go to the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis6 with the number 6conspiracy.com. And I've done a few changes on the website as well, so it's easier to access me now. There's a place for people to contact me on the media page to click on for an interview, and then also have a contact the author page. So if people want to get a document on some of the information that I might be talking about, like second incursion or things like that, just get a hold of me, ask by topic, and I send that out at no charge.
Oh, fantastic. That's great. Well, we're definitely going to have you back on before the book comes out. So keep me posted, because I'd love to get more into prophecy and all that kind of stuff. That would be a lot of fun, because I know you deal with that heavily in the book as well. But unfortunately for today, we are all out of time. Gary, thank you so much for joining us again. We'll definitely have to have you back on sometime soon.
Well, thank you. And so happy to be here, and hopefully we've raised a little bit of curiosity, because that's what the book is designed to do.
Yeah, I think so. I think people are going to be really excited about this book. And also all of you out there, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe. Give us a thumbs up if you like this interview. Comment, share this around. And when you subscribe, turn on all notifications so you know when a new episode comes out. All right. So for everybody out there, thank you so much. Love you all. Until next time, take care and God bless. Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Tonight, we have a very special episode for you. We are welcoming back to the show Gary Wayne, author of The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind, and The Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Helps Define End-Time Prophecy. And that second book will be the topic of tonight's show. We had him on a few weeks ago, and tonight we're going to continue our conversation going through his amazing new book. Glad to have you back on, Gary. How are you doing?
Doing very well, and thank you for inviting me back to your show, and getting so excited as we get closer to the actual receiving of the book. I was talking to the publisher last week, and in the process that happens today, it's got to go through a queue, then it goes through a queue at the printers, but it's actually being printed right now, so definitely going to be beating that March 12th release date by a fair bit. And I'm actually hoping, and I'm always optimistic, but within a couple of weeks I'll have books, and all of the pre-orders, whether it's with me through my website or through Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever, they'll be shipping those sooner than the actual advertised release date. I would think that they would. And it was really nice, and it shows that we're really close. I saw yesterday when I checked on Amazon is that the digital Kindle version is now up for book 2 as well for pre-order. So they like to time that with the arrival of the books. So I think that is getting, another sign that it's getting closer.
Oh, perfect. Well, if people do want to pre-order, where do they go to do that?
Well, the easiest place to go to is to my website. That's at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's the number 6conspiracy.com. And on the website, if you want to pre-order, you can go to the Buy Now page, and you're going to get an option for book 1 or book 2. And if you wanted to buy book 1, you go to book 1. You want to pre-order for book 2, go to book 2. And on that page, if you want to get a signed copy and pre-order, then there's a page for Canada, there's a page for the US, and there's a page for the rest of the world, and that's for both books as well. And you also have links off of those buy page and the front page over to the Kindle. I don't have my Kindle link up yet for the new book, but I'm hoping to have that up this week, but it is for the other books. We have a Kindle link to go to Amazon. You also have an Amazon.com link, an Amazon.ca link, and a BarnesandNoble.com link, and that takes you right to the book to place your order. if that's the way you would like to go. And I'm fine either way. The signed copies I do with pleasure, and just love it when I receive an order, but it's good either way. I get supported. I get a royalty off of the books, and so it's fine. So whichever way people want to support me by purchasing one of my books.
Fantastic, and I highly suggest everybody go do that. Both books are fantastic. From what I read of the second book, it's absolutely phenomenal. And when you were here last, we went through some of the highlights of the first two sections of your newest book. And obviously, we didn't get to everything because I want people to pick up your book. I don't want to give everything away here. But today, I figure let's hit the ground running and pick up where we left off. Section 3 is titled The Human Hybrid Canaanite Confederacy, and it opens with chapter 22, Nimrod and Babel City. Who is Nimrod, and what things did you discover when researching for this chapter?
Yeah, Nimrod, what I learned after writing book 1 was a figure that is hotly contested within the Christian genre and outside the Christian belief. And similar kinds of a story for both. The occult versions or the polytheist versions can provide a lot more detail as to some of his exploits, because we get a very, very limited accounting of Nimrod as he's associated with Babel and the founder of Babel in Genesis 10 and Genesis 11, and that he's the one who leads the first rebellion after the flood. He's an Antichrist archetype figure for the end time, and he has a religion that he imposes as well and leads people away from God. And so these are two key words, Babel and Nimrod, when we want to understand the end time, because Nimrod, as being an Antichrist figure, we can learn a lot of details of what he did as to what happened in the end time. And Babel is the Hebrew source word for Babylon, as it shows up in the New Testament, and the Babylon religion. So it's the same religion. It's going to be that same mystical religion and the Enochian mysticism that I talk about in book 1. So in book 2, what I'm talking about now is just sort of dealing with the aspect a little bit more of, was he Nephilim, was he Rephaim, was he human, was he a hybrid? And we don't get his mother, but we get his father. And by sort of inference, and he became Chalal or Halal, he became a mighty one or a gibbering, but not necessarily a giant. And so I sort of walk through that sort of aspect for people. And then what I do is I bring in the Septuagint, and I do in limited ways. It's an interesting Old Testament parallel account, but it has a lot of inconsistencies and inaccuracies, and one of the reasons why it wasn't used for a core source for the KJV Bible on the printing was because it was just thought to be a little bit too unreliable, but they did use it for reference. And when it talks about Nimrod in the Septuagint, we're told a little bit more as to what this mighty one was like, or a mighty one before God and a mighty hunter. And that's, again, the Hebrew word gibor or gibberim. And so in understanding that the Septuagint has a Greek biases to it, it's translated from Hebrew into Greek, and they describe Nimrod as being a giant and earning his reputation on fighting against the giants, which is really kind of enlightening. I mean, we're told he's a mighty warrior, a mighty one, a mighty hunter, but you have to sort of infer who's he fighting against if all of the Noahites are there. He's either fighting amongst each other, which in some of the accounts, and particularly Jewish legend, there's a war before he takes power, so amongst the various factions. But that's not enough to raise him to a level of this mythical character, not mythical, but legendary character. And so he's fighting against a group of people that are probably by the Jewish people of the, as it came down through the history, they sort of understood the context of this, that the giants, as they're described, and as I go through this book, I describe them as the aboriginals to the lands that after Babel, people moved into and lived amongst. So if they were in those lands before Babel, that means the giants either survived the flood or they were recreated again after the flood. And these are the people that Nimrod is earning his reputation against. These are the people who he's building the city, which implies high walls and towers and protection. And he's going to build the tower for a statement to them as to which God he's following, which is now going to be their gods, and to the God in heaven. And so it's an important sort of segue into section 3, because I'm going to be talking about hybrids in section 3. Hybrid humans and giants, not as in hybrids as in angelic being and humans. There's two groups. There's a smaller giant and a larger giant. And the hybrids are the smaller giants. And so Nimrod is the source of the dynasties in Sumer after Babel. He actually intermarries with the peoples. There's a people there that are called the Elamites, and these are different than the eponymous name and the patriarchal name coming from Elam. I think it's adopted or changed to that name because that goes back to the Hebrew Olam, as in ancient, and ancient peoples of the East. And so it goes to aboriginals, and and Nimrod intermarried with these aboriginals. It would be the same as the Cadmonim. We would know them as the Cadmonites. It means Eastern and ancient. It would be probably the same groups of people as the Cadmonites that were settling in the Mesopotamian area. And he intermarries with daughters or females of these giants to create a hybrid dynasty. So as you get his dynasty that comes downstream, you have Nimrod, which is the Sumerian En-Murakar and Murakar, depending on which language you're going to translate that from, and there's about 3 different spellings for it. And he's 3rd generation like Nimrod, and he has a Babel story around him in Sumeria as well, and I cover that off in the first book. But that's the dynasty that includes Erech as one of the cities that Nimrod founds. That's the city of Erech of King Lugalbanda, meaning giant king, and part of the epic heroes of Erech. And he is going to have a son through a female or a mother goddess, fertility goddess of Sumeria named Nin, and that's going to produce Gilgamesh. And so there's a succession, and it starts building that sort of succession of those giants that's going to go down to the War of Giants. In those various successions of the empires, and the War of Giants would be the the 3rd dynasty that would take over the Lugalbanda Gilgamesh dynasty, but includes the same cities. And so we have that sort of interplay that's going on that's important for history and for the interaction of giants at that time and throughout our history with the giants. So I covered Nimrod in ways that haven't, I don't think, been discussed yet, and put it into a historical context and biblical chronology for after the flood that dovetails perfectly into the details of the Bible. And it sets up the hybrid nations, as he's probably one of the first ones to set up these hybrid nations.
Yeah, definitely. And when looking at the Bible, Genesis is full of tribes, but there's not typically a lot of information about them, and you go through quite a few in your book. Let's start with the Anakim. Who are the Anakim, and what makes a patriarch-less nation unique?
Yeah. And that's the perfect sort of distinction. So you see the word Anak in most of the English translations. You see Anakite, and I think one time there might be Anakim as it's translated. And so I am is typically the male plural in Hebrew. So Gibor is the singular version, Gibborim is the male plural. Gibborah, 1369 versus 1368 of Gibor, Gibborim is the female aspect. And you can denote that as a female denotion, as a gender, or you could as in action or in power. So when you see Gibor transferred as mighty, or translated as mighty, like for the mighty strength of God, that would, you could translate that as Gibor, depending on how the application is. But typically when that power is being used, it's going to be a AH plural. So just a little bit of nuance on the words there. So Anakite, Anakim, they're in Hebrew it's basically Anaki, and transliterated with the plural as Anakim. And they are a nation that's not listed in the Table of Nations in 1 Chronicles or Genesis 10. And so what we're told is after the flood, that all of the nations descend out of the 70 patriarchs listed in Genesis 10 and 1 Chronicles, and also counted as the same number as the sons of Jacob born in Egypt. But that's more of a prophetic aspect of that dual prophecy, and also numbered as the 70 nations. So it's a standard that was born to Adam before the flood for the number of nations. So it's a standard number of nations, but the Anakim are not in there. So where do they come from? And that's the key question there. And so in the book of Joshua, we're actually told who the patriarch is. And that's Arba, as in Kiriath Arba, the older name for Hebron, where Sheshai, Ahiham, and Talmai, Anakim kings, and Numbers 13 are described as ruling from. And they show up also in other passages in the books. So if they're not in the Table of Nations, then they're probably not human. So who are they? So and who is Arba? So they're described as giants in Numbers 13:33, which is the embellished, some people call it the evil part of the report, which is trying to scare Israel. And that word that we saw, the giants, the children of Anak, these are the children, or the Anak are the children of giants. That word giant goes back to the Hebrew word Nephil or Nephilim, that's used in Genesis 6:4. So Nephilim is only used 3 times in the Old Testament, once in Genesis 6:4 and twice in Numbers 13:33. All the other times, except for once in the book of Joshua, where you have a giant translation, which comes from Gibborim, the Hebrew word is going to be Rapha for giant. So they're using a different word and they're trying to scare the Israelites that these are like the Nephilim, or as big and powerful and terrible. These are a different kind of giant, and they're not quite as big, but they're still giants. And so we know that they are giants not only from that embellishment as Nephilim, but they're described as giants in Deuteronomy 2, where it lists other giants in the lands that Israel are going to take. And giant is the Hebrew word Rapha, and Rephaim is the male plural. And so the Anakim are Rephaim, or a kind of Rephaim, and the patriarch is Arba. Rapha is also a tribe of giants. And Rephaim, as it shows up as a tribe in Genesis 14 and Genesis 15, and Genesis 15 is part of the mighty 7 of the mighty 10, where the Cadmonim are also listed in the lands promised to Abraham and his descendants in the covenant that's coming. This is another tribe that doesn't come out of the Table of Nations. So what we learn from this is that the patriarchs for the giant tribes aren't listed in the Table of Nations because they don't descend from Noah. Now, to create these giants, and before Babel, and to be the aboriginals that the Babel people will migrate and move in and live amongst, they have to be born before, and that's also helps to explain who Nimrod is gaining his reputation against. that they're there and warring against the humans at that time. And so they're going to need daughters. And you have a very important incident that happens right after the ark lands on Ararat, which means cursed or cursed. And it's named aptly for the curse of Ham, for, depending on how you want to translate that, violating Ham in a sexual way, and or his wife. I think it implies Ham based on the wording, but you could translate that either way. But there's a curse that is placed on Ham, but it doesn't pass on to Ham, and it doesn't pass on to most of his descendants, just one. It's Canaan. And so it's the Canaanites that are going to say, hey, we're not going to take this curse, and they're going to be the ones that are going to squat in the land with the Rephaim after Babel to intermarry with the giants. But more importantly, they're the ones who are going to provide the daughters to the gods ruling from the council of gods after the flood, the offspring gods, the Baalim, to provide daughters to these gods, and maybe even males to the female goddesses, because in the Ugaritic text, for example, it's not biblical, but they are the creators of the Rephaim. And they're doing fertility rituals to bring them back, because they've already gone to the pit prison for their crimes, just like their parents' God did before the flood, because they have a fertility issue. And so they're praying for not only Baal to come back, but also Ashtaroth. So it's the inference is they would like both of them to create giants, because their numbers are dwindling, and that both of them produced giants. So you would presume then that Canaan provided sons and daughters by that inference. And that's how the Rephaim show up after the flood from a second incursion. And so in the Table of Nations, we get the Canaanites listed. There's 12 tribes, but only 3 have a patriarch. That's Canaan, Sidon, and Heth. The rest are a family or a name, and you get like the Amorites, you get the Hivites, you get the Arkites, the Sinites, but they don't get a patriarch for them. And they're the only 9 in the 70 that don't have a patriarch. That's very odd. And that Hebrew word is like mishpacha, which can mean a family, yes, but a family is in a kind of being, as in a species. So this is a different kind of patriarch that's a different kind of species than what Heth or Sidon are. And by implication, Canaan, Sidon, and Heth, from what I said before, likely intermarried with female giants as well to create their hybrid nation, hybrid Rephaim. So now you got those ones being listed as hybrids because they have a patriarch that comes from Noah, but the females that intermarried with the male gods, they're not listed because they have a patriarchal Rephaim, and that they're going to take their name eponymously or named after to sort of reflect part of that. So like Jebus or Yebus would be the patriarch for the Jebusites that controlled Jerusalem up till the time of King David. And so you can trace through different methodologies the patriarchal name of that giant that started those 9 patriarchless tribes. And so the Canaanites and the Amorites are described as hybrids in other nations. They have names for them, and one of the names comes out of two different sources out of the Egyptian records, including the execration text, as the Shazu. And what they show amongst the Shazu is that they lived amongst the Ayakim, or the Ayaki, which is just sort of putting a different order of the suffix of the plural. This is the Anakim, and these are kings, but you have Amorite and Canaanite kings living also amongst the Anakim giants, as they're sort of understood in the execration text. And so they were 7 to 9 feet tall, the hybrid giant humans. And so where you have those patriarchless giants, or tribes, those are the hybrids of Canaan that were living in the land amongst various tribes of the Rephaim. And we get an example of this happening in terms of what Nimrod would have done, or what Canaan, Seth and not Seth, but Heth and Sidon did, as well as their daughters, with an incident that's outside of the Table of Nations and almost like an addendum to it. It's included at the end of the Table of Nations in First Chronicles, but it is also shown in Genesis and Genesis 36. It's with the Dukes of Seir, the Horim of Seir. We know Horim are giants from, again, Deuteronomy 2, where it says they're giants, and that's Repha, singular, Rephaim, plural. And so Seir is one of these dukes. He's not the patriarch. And I explain who the patriarch of the Horim are in the Bible, in my book as well. But Seir has a daughter as a giant, and it's a purebred Horim giant named Timnah. And Timnah marries Eliphaz, daughter of Eliphaz, son of Esau, brother to Jacob. And so you have a new dynasty here started with a rare female giant, and that's the source to their fertility issue after the flood, is that they can't produce enough females. And so in the occult and in the royal mythos, if you're going to start a new dynasty, you need a pure-blood fairy matriarchal bloodline to intermarry with another powerful, what they would call dragon bloodline, but in this case, even better for them, a bloodline that comes from Abraham linked to the covenant. And so that word duke is the Hebrew word aleph, which is the term that connects into the elf or the fairy matriarchal bloodlines. And there'll be 12 of these tribes that come out of Edom. That's the rival to the 12 tribes of Israel from the polytheist version. So we need to understand that there's two different kinds of giants. And what I do in the first two chapters of section 3 is start to explain that concept in detail so that we can then get into looking at each of the patriarchless tribes, how we know who the patriarch is, where they lived, and how they're going to impact Israel.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And it's so fascinating that when we read just through the Bible and just get these names, that there's actually like a rich history of what all of these are. And I think you, more than anybody else, has done just such an excellent job of pulling all that information together into something that's easy to understand and comprehensive for the rest of us. We have so much more to talk about in the members only section, specifically the post-Diluvian Rephaim world order. And for all of you out there, Gary mentioned something about an elven bloodline. We're going to have to ask Gary about that. So if you want full access, head on over right now to dailyrenegade.com and get a membership. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year. And I suggest getting the year if you can, because it's cheaper in the long run. You essentially get 2 months for free. That is dailyrenegade.com, where members also get early access to all of our videos, and we will continue the conversation over there. Also, for people watching, we have scheduled 2 more interviews with Gary in the next couple of months to go through some more of his books. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, click the bell so you can turn on all notifications so you'll be made aware when we do that. And yes, again, we will continue the conversation over at dailyrenegade.com. So for everyone viewing for free, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to check out Gary Wayne at Genesis 6, that's the number 6, Genesis6conspiracy.com. And you'll find a wealth of resources there, including his new book. Members watching on the website, hold on the line for the rest. And for everyone watching for free, thank you so much. Until next time, take care and God bless. Okay, thank you all for being members. Let's get right back into it. Section 4 is called the Post-Diluvian Rephaim World Order. And we probably won't be able to get to all these, but it's important to note that the gods of El and Baal reigned at Ugarit over giants, first before and then later after the flood. So with that in mind, what is the Hivim and Perizim? This is what you start this section out with.
Yeah, it's a good question. So as we talked about in the first part of the show, is that we have peoples that show up in the Bible and they don't have a patriarch that comes from a Noah listed in the Table of Nations. So you have the Hivim, who I start with because it's kind of an interesting sort of mix coming out of Genesis 36, where you have Lotan, who is described as both a Horim and a Hivim. So that's either a biblical mistake or there's a close association with the Horim with the Hivim. And so I think they're a branch of the Horim, and so, but that have a separate sort of a patriarch. And so that would be Hivi in Hebrew, Chiviy, and all of these giant names are listed in the singular format, as opposed to if they're called the Hivites, that's plural, or Hivim would be plural. So that's indicating, and Strong seems to indicate a number of these, that these are patriarchal names to a tribe. But again, Hivi does not show up in the Table of Nations. And so this section is going to go through the names of giants. That adds to the list of the Rephaim and the Anakim that are covered before, and provide just how many names are actually there that are giants. And you have to have more than just not being listed in the Table of Nations to classify them as a giant. There has to be more context to that. And that's where the real digging sort of comes in, and I provide as much biblical or outside biblical that would have a parallel testimony to that individual or tribe as it relates to what we're talking about. So the Hivim are a tribe that lives in more than one area. So they're related down in Seir, but they're also in central Canaan as well, and they're associated with the Gibeonites. In fact, the Gibeonites are called Hivites, and I would say Hivim. And even though I have Hivites listed in the section before, these are the hybrids, because the Hivim are going to continue to intermarry so that they don't go extinct, and they're going to create that hybrid race of Hivites. So you have a number of tribes that have a giant race name and a hybrid race name, very much related. Another example would be the offspring of Timnah and Eliphaz that we talked about to create the great Amalekite race, which is a hybrid race that's going to go live amongst Amalekim that live in Petra and in that area. And there's a couple other pockets of the Amalekites as well. And we know that there are a giant race of Amalekim because they show up in the War of Giants in Genesis 14, just as the Horim do. And so the Horim can't come from Horites, and the Amalekites can't come from Amalek, because they're predated in the War of Giants. So we have to be aware that the Bible and then the translations we get don't do a very good job of distinguishing the giants and the hybrids. And sometimes as this generation goes on, it becomes very much more blurred and blended. But in the beginning, you can make those kinds of distinctions. And so these are the ones that are going to make a deal with, part of the Hivim are going to make a deal with Joshua. And they're going to become the temple servants. And it's going to be the Nephilim, as they're known downstream and recorded down in the time of King David and King Solomon. And so you have giant temple servants who seemingly have converted. And it's just an interesting sort of side story to who the Hivim are. But these are the ones that are, a very, very powerful nation that's going to be part of this central alliance of nations. And so the opening of the name of the chapter is the post-diluvian Rephaim order. And these are the nations that in the covenant land are going to make up that hegemony of power. And before you have the war of giants, you have rival, very powerful giants in Mesopotamia, and you have all of these powerful nations in the land of the covenant. And they're in basically an Eastern and Western alliance. And it's going to come to a head in the Genesis 14 war, which is going to change the hegemony. It doesn't wipe out all of the giants out of the covenant land. It just changes sort of the power base and the influence to a certain degree. So yeah, these are the Hivim, and they're actually in a couple other locations as well throughout the covenant land. I don't want to overwhelm people with too much detail on them, but understand them as a separate race, and the Gibeonites are a branch of that. And they have a 5-city pentapolis in their Hivim alliance in central Canaan. And it's going to be a major part of the first campaign over once Joshua crosses the Jordan, as they enter into the conquest of the covenant land. And that is one of the major alliances, and it has, like I say, 5 city-states. And Gibeon is one of the royal cities. And it is a city sort of capital of the Pentapolis. Now, Pentapolis is a standard formation of city-states in an alliance that the giants set up throughout the covenant land. So you start to get an introduction into who the Hivim are and where they're located, and there's some of their other connections, and that they're related to the Horim but distinct. Yeah. And probably a sub-patriarch within the Horim patriarchal branch of tribes.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I have to ask you about this, because one of the next chapters that you have, last time you were on, we talked about unicorns, these evil unicorns in the ancient past. Were there evil elves as well? What is the Horim Elven bloodline?
So, yeah, Horim comes from Hori, singular, Choriy, and Hori means like pale white. And these ones were also known to have red hair. So you have red hair, pale skin, and one would presume they would have probably red or not red, but blue or hazel eyes. And the Anakim that we talked about earlier, they were known to have blonde hair, pale skin, and blue eyes, as did the Amorites. So the Amorites would seemingly have been probably produced through the Anakim as the hybrid tribe. And so the Horim Elven bloodline is that bloodline that is a royal dynasty that's going to produce the Malakim bloodline and the Horite and Horim bloodlines of Edom. So the Edomite bloodline. And that bloodline of the Edomite bloodline is going to come down, actually end up with Herod in the time of Jesus, and trying to kill the Messiah, just as the Amalekites are trying to wipe Israel from the face of the earth to take away the birthrights, and by effective through law to take the birthright, the blessings, and the Messianic promise that Jacob passed on to Israel, because they would be wiped out from the face of the earth and come from a direct bloodline. So this is the Horim Elven bloodline. And that's the intermarriage of a Horim, Timnah, matriarchal fairy queen, with a patriarchal bloodline from Abraham. And so you have this word Eleph, which is the root word for elven, as it shows up in the occult bloodlines and allegories. And the elven Messianic bloodline, as the Cathars recognized, is the bloodline that goes back through the Tuatha De Danann, the fairy people, giants after the flood, and also were Nephilim before the flood as well, that are connected to the tribes in Israel through the Ugaritic texts with the assembly of Baal at Mount Hermon. Even though Ugarit is part of that city, the Ashtaroth and Edrei are also the cities of Baal and Ashtaroth and the Baalim council. And the Baalim is the male plural, so multiple gods in that council. And that not only did they have a council of gods that ruled there, and after they left, obviously, ones have been promoted to rule from that council who still report to Satan to this day and will for a little time longer over the 70 nations that we talked about in Deuteronomy 32. But they also had another assembly of the Datanu or Datanu, several different ways you can pronounce that depending on which scholar you're reading and how they want to emphasize the syllables. And the Datanu is the Tuatha De Danann. So now you have the Datanu, and this is also called the assembly of the Datanu. So it's a very important part of the tribes. So, and you have this tribe that's showing up in Ugarit, which is in northern Canaan, between Tyre and Mount Hermon. And it has this dynasty of Rapiu, Rapium, RPM, Old Semitic, Rephaim giants that have this assembly, and they have a royal dynasty and dynastic bloodlines, and they produce kings all throughout the land. They all report to this tribe of Datanu that reports to the assembly of gods. And this is the elven bloodline that is being talked about. That's part of the Horim that becomes the fairy kings and the fairy queens. And so a classic example where you can see this sort of this imagery wedded together comes downstream in King Arthur. And the Knights of the Round Table, the Knights of the Table of the Lord of the Rings, the Rephaim kings after the flood, the Nephilim kings before the flood, and that's where they're awarded their divine right to rule. And Nippur is one of the names, Mount Hermon is another, Saphon as it's recorded in Ugaritic Texas, all the same location. That's where the kings received their divine right to rule, as Prince James, the mighty Prince James, which I don't find too coincidental in his use of mighty, as we talk about Gibborim and giants and royals, kings of God, bloodlines who have a divine right to rule that comes from Mount Hermon. So this is the... I lost my train of thought with that one. But this is the bloodline that is being provided the divine right to rule for the kings. And so this is, I was talking about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And so these kings of the Round Table, they're not knights, they're actually kings. And if you dig into the characters, it's kings from Norway, it's kings from France, and all sorts of kings in this united realm. You have King Arthur, who is son of Uther Pendragon. So he's representing the patriarchal bloodline, the dragon or the raven, matriarchal, fairy or owl. And his genealogy goes back to the fairy giants, the Tuatha De Danann. And then the fairy queen, mother goddess, representative on earth is Guinevere. And she's a fairy queen and a matriarchal queen that goes also back to the Tuatha De Danann. This is what they call the LB gens versus the Julia gens or other gens. And it's a branch of the Elven gens, as it's talked about in the Albigensian religion and the Cathar religion in the time of the Albigensian crusade and before. And it's that Magianic dragon bloodline that they want to produce the Antichrist through. Not saying they're going to be the ones that actually produce it, but one of the bloodlines that would like to produce that pedigree of Antichrist with the genealogies to match. So we need to understand what they're talking about when they talk about the House of Dragon or fairy queens in the allegories of the bloodlines in terms of how it's going to impact for the end time.
Man, that is so fascinating how all this stuff connects. And I know that we're limited on time, and again, we barely scratched the surface. But what do you want most for people to take away from our conversation? And one more time, where can people pick up your book and follow you online?
Yeah, so I think what I'd like people to sort of take away from the conversation is that there's a hidden history that we're not taught. Either by the secular world, polytheists, or our churches. And there's important information in there, as I've been making a few of those references for the end time. And through the first half of the book, I mean, whether or not you're Christian or non-Christian, if you want to learn more about giants, this has more about giants in one location than that comes out of the Bible than anywhere else. So you'll learn more about giants and the angelic order and how all of that work, both loyal. But the important information is that that information is there to provide us context for what we're being taught in the Bible. So all the good things that churches teach us, they need to, in my opinion, they'd be wise to add the larger context of where we were, what our history was, where we are, and where we're going, and that nothing is new under the sun, and what was will be again, as in the days of Noah, and that we need to understand the context of the principles and values and laws that we're taught, but also why we're here and where we're going. Otherwise, we're going to be deceived. And you see a lot of popular culture with Akhenaten and King Tut, and once you start to understand why he's so important, because he's the nexus point of the dragon bloodlines, a very important one, you'll understand why he gets so much prominence compared to other kings. And the Hyksos are another one, and I'll cover the Hyksos in this chapter as well, and as they connect into the Rephaim bloodlines. And then in book 3, I'll tie them in a little bit more to the time of Jacob and the time of Joseph when they're in Israel. But it's important to understand prehistory if you want to understand the world today, and why they want a world government, why they want a universal religion, and where we're going. And so if people want to get a hold of me and find out a little bit more what's in the book, go to my website. That's the Genesis6conspiracy.com with the number 6. And on that website, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1 and a generous excerpt of all chapters in book 2. So again, go to the books, go to book 1 or to book 2, and just the table of contents should catch your attention in both books, or what I've written in there, and it's just a small morsel of what's in the entire book. So it's packed with information, and don't worry about the size of the book. I wrote book 2 the same way I wrote book 1. So each chapter is about 4 to 6 pages, and they're all mini stories. And so you can read one chapter at a time or bounce around, but each chapter sort of provides a little bit more to the story and will come up as the book unfolds. So you can read it as you can digest it, and you can use it as a reference book, and it has arguments and information in there in a way that if people want to know about how can you say that the Makathim were giants, you can go to that chapter and you can show it to them. And then Makathim will come up in the time of King David and Absalom. And the connection between David and the coup between Absalom as being a hybrid from Makkah, a female in this case, and Makkah can be a female and a male name, which starts to give you context for what was really going on, and also understanding that Absalom set up his location for the coup in Hebron, Kiriath Arba. So to get a book, you can pre-order off the website. Go to the Buy Now page for book 2, and go to the page where you live, Canada, US, or overseas. Do the same thing for book 1, and you can get that shipped right away if you want book 1. And if you want to buy from another source, I have a link over to barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, amazon.ca, the Kindle link for book 1, and hopefully within the next week or so, I've got the Kindle link up there for book 2. And so I get asked a lot, do you need to read book 1 before reading book 2? And I would say it's helpful, but you don't have to. There's a little bit of overlap to connect the two books, but they're written to be read independently. But if you read book 2 as a Christian because you want to go really deep into the Bible, then you'll probably, and you haven't read book 1, it's going to entice you to want to say, okay, what's the larger global implication to what he's talking about? And if you read book 1, you got that larger global implication, and you say, I have a hunger for more what's in the Bible, you go read book 2. So it's kind of read, you can read either one. It's not redundant, it's directionally the same, but both books are probably the 2 most unique books on the market in Christian prophecy and in prehistory.
And I absolutely agree with that. I highly suggest everybody go check that out. The website, again, is Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and that's the number 6, conspiracy.com. Check out the resources there. Check out the books. And Gary, thank you so much again for joining us. I look forward to our next conversation. We have 2 more scheduled in the next couple months or so.
Awesome.
All right, and thank all of you for joining us yet again on the Sharpening Report. I again am your host, Josh Peck. Until next time, love you all. Take care, and God bless.
Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Tonight we have a very special episode for you. We are welcoming back to the show Gary Wayne, author of The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind, and The Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Help Define End-Time Prophecy. And that second book will be the topic of tonight's show. Glad to have you back, Gary. How are you doing?
Well, doing pretty well, and very happy to be back, and looking forward to talking about the book a little bit more. And it's kind of an important day. It's got the official release out there today for my book. So I was able to pick up a Kindle version on it last Friday off of .ca, Amazon.ca. .au had it available, .uk had it available, but not .com. So some people have already bought some of the digital versions, and also there went up over the weekend 3 5-star ratings, so a pretty good start from that.
Yeah, that's great.
Now for Amazon, they've already started shipping the book. I've been getting emails with pictures and pictures on Facebook of people who bought through Amazon or other people online, and so they're starting to receive them. I have not received my books yet, so anybody listening to this, and I'm going to be trying to get some information out on that today, seeing as how this is the official release date. My books for my inventory were shipped 2 weeks ago. They were supposed to be shipped a month ago, but they opted to ship all of the books off the first print run to the retailers because they were oversold. And so a second and third run I've had. So my shipment left about 2 weeks ago, but I don't have them yet. They're lost somewhere. So we're trying to track them down, probably caught up in customs. So it's the only thing I could think of. But to date, and we've been tracing since, I've been trying to get my publisher to trace since Thursday. We don't know exactly where they're at. All we know is when they shipped and who they were shipped with. And there's so much turmoil at the printers right now that they're not exactly giving us the information that I would desperately want, because I want to start to inform people as to when they can start getting their books.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully that all works out soon, and it's a phenomenal book from what I've been able to read. And what's really cool is you offer excerpts of the book if people want to check it out before they buy. People can go to Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and that's the number 6, Genesis number 6 conspiracy.com, and you can check out the book there. Last time we had you on, you have 7 sections in this book, and the last time we had you on, I believe we dealt with section 4. So I wanted to skip ahead a little bit because we can't give the whole book away for free for everybody. I want people to pick this up. So I wanted to skip ahead to section 6, which is prehistory, history, and prophecy.
Yeah.
And you have a short description here that says, post-Diluvian history was shaped by the 6 beast empires and will once more be shaped by the end time 7th and 8th beast empire. So let's start right off the bat with chapter 58, and people don't feel daunted about there being so many chapters in here. It is packed with information, but it's really easy to read, and I think people will really like it. So let's start with Pharaoh and the beast empires. What are these empires, and which Pharaoh are we talking about?
Yeah, so Section 5, which we didn't cover off, is an extraordinarily terrific section for Christians, and it leads into Section 6. And what's in Section 5 is all of the giant wars after the flood that are discussed in the Bible. So I go through not only Genesis 14, but all the individual campaigns in the Exodus wars, and show you how we know they're fighting against giants and hybrid giants, and all the way through the book of Judges, and all the way through King Saul, King David, and down through King Solomon. And the important thing to remember is, as we talk about moving into Section 6 is a transition from prehistory. So the first part of the book was designed to walk through prehistory, give you a lot of information that's in the Bible, deeper than any other book that's out there on the market today, start to highlight important words, terms, and concepts that are used in end-time prophetic allegory. So once that's done, then I start to transition to a Section 6 into the last section, which is all prophecy. And this is going to continue with what was done in the first 5 sections, but in the transition mode. So it's partly history, partly prophecy in a lot larger way. So in Section 5, Israel coming out of Egypt is in one of the beast empires. So the beast empires, as I explained throughout the book, are the dynastic bloodlines and the sort of embryos of the Antichrist wannabes that are coming to power. And so we have Michael, who fights against the beast empires, but not from them rising, as the book of Daniel talks about, but to ensure Antichrist doesn't come to power until the ordained time. So all of these beast empires are trying to present an Antichrist type figure. So Israel, in its concept and creation, is going to be intimately connected throughout its history with the beast empires. So it grows up, and there's 7 beast empires, as we learn in the book of Revelation in chapter 12, 13, and 17, which is an add-on to the 5 empires discussed in the book of Daniel, Daniel 2 and the metallic empires, and Daniel 7 with the beast empires, where I draft the term beast empires, and Daniel 8, which is also talking about beast empires, but with a different additional piece of information to what the book of Revelation is talking about. So you have 7 empires in Daniel 8, but it comes through adding more information about the Antichrist and the end-time empire through that sort of understanding, through the Greek Empire. And so Alexander would be that first empire in that prophecy. You would have then the empire, the beast empire of Greece, that is split up into 4 empires. Rome will succeed it. It's also part of the Greek Empire, one of the 4. And so now you have, that is 6 empires, and then the last empire that is a direct extension so in an allegorical form from the Greek Empire, and Alexander rises in the end time, so 7. The other allegory that is understood is that you have Assyria and Egypt as the 2 beast empires. So you can use Nimrod and Babel or Assyria, whichever one you choose, as being that beast empire. And Israel is connected to all of these beast empires. So it is raised into a nation in Israel. And then God frees them through Moses out of that beast empire. So there's an intimate relationship there that they grow from inception into full nationhood. And then Assyria is the first one of the beast nations that are going to act against Israel in a way that is from the curses of the Holy Covenant. So they're there, and they would take all of Israel and the southern kingdom, Judah, into exile, except that the southern kingdom repents. So it's just the northern kingdom where the lost tribes, where the tribes get lost into the nations. And so all throughout history, you have these beast nations interacting. So now the next one is Babylon, which takes Judah into exile. And then Persia, Medes rises, and they permit them to go back and build the temple. Greece rises, which we already talked about, and they actually do a form of an abomination and dominate Israel. And then Rome comes and does the diaspora and destroys Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. All the way through, they're interconnected with Israel. So it's an important context to understand end-time prophecy, and accordingly, those beast empires rise as or an extension of the beast empire, and rises in the end time with the 7th empire. They're going to be intimately related to the fulfillment of Israel and Judean end time prophecy. So in section 6, chapter 58, we're talking about Pharaoh and the beast empires. And this is really from a conceptual basis, and then specifically with some passages, particularly in the book of Ezekiel, about Pharaoh as one of these Rephaim bloodline beast kings, understanding that Egypt was the first of the beast empires. But, for example, in Ezekiel 32, where I'm going to be talking a fair bit about in section 6, this is the passage of the terrible ones. And the terrible ones is the Hebrew word erit. And if you put ones on there, which the translators have inserted for plural, that would be eritim. And it means all sorts of words that would describe Rephaim kings. They're strong, they're powerful, they're tyrants, with a few other interesting add-ons, which is we've talked about, I think, a little bit previously in the book, is that they were childless and had fertility issues, which is why they had to intermarry with humans. And that word erit is the root word for the Ugaritic text. So Ug, erit, that's the city of Og, as I explained earlier on in the book. And Kiriath Ugarit is how it would be understood, just as you have Kiriath Arba for the city of Arba. So Pharaoh is talking to some interesting people in Ezekiel 32. And there's 2 groups. One is the terrible ones, and one are the mighty, which is the Hebrew word El for angels. And he's talking to them in the pit prison. So they're actually communicating to him in this prophecy, whether it's actually literal or it's just providing us context. And I look at this as part of a dual prophecy, which I think we've also talked about, that has significant meaning in prehistory. So you have the pit prison and things going on here. You have the prophecy as it's applicable for the time of the prophet and also for the end time. And these terrible ones, when you go through the list of those names, like the Assyrian or Meshech and Tubal, these are important kings for the end time, particularly with Antichrist, and particularly with the Gog War, where you have Gog, chief prince of Meshech, Gog of Magog, chief prince of Meshech, in Ezekiel 38 and 39, which is the war that I think is the counterfeit Armageddon that Antichrist rises to power on. That is equivalent to Joel 1 and 2. Joel 3 would be the Armageddon War. And Revelation 9. And so this is part of that sort of great sort of deception to accept Antichrist. So he is a beast king in that wannabe bloodline dragon messiah, like the terrible ones that are in the pit prison. And they're called the terrible ones because they did terrible things to humankind while they were on earth, and they were killed, likely beheaded, which I cover decapitation off of how that all connects in here in book 2. And those ones are sent to the sides of the pit, in the pit prison. And these are the ones that are talking with Pharaoh. Like, it is an absolutely scary, frightening, I guess disturbing, something that might send cognizant dissonance if you're not into the preternatural nature of the Bible as to what's going on. And that these are the ones that are going to be released in the end time, along with the mighty, the fallen angels, the Elohim, small case, E, when the pit prison is opened. And then I connect these allegories back to Pharaoh and in Ezekiel 32 in other chapters with Pharaoh, so that you understand these are all about the same concept in terms of the time of the prophet and for the end time, and some of the interesting allegories that go with it. And I also have a chapter that I go through the details of the terrible ones, just a couple chapters down in chapter 61. So this is a terrific sort of transition because it's transitioning so much into the end time, and it's giving you those a lot of names and terms that you're going to need for end time prophecy.
And that, yeah, excuse me, that's absolutely fascinating because, a lot of times we try to piece together how this timeline works, and I think you've done a phenomenal job. Right before that chapter on the terrible ones, you have a chapter called The Mysterious Trees of Eden. What did your research bring up there?
Well, yeah, so in these trees of Eden in Ezekiel 31, you have the Assyrian tree. Well, that makes no sense, right? So it's one of those understandings of the dual prophecy is that it gives you important information of prehistory for context. And it's also talking about empires and individuals at the time of the prophet, and also an allegory for the end times. So the Assyrian, there's no way there could be an Eden. That's before the flood. So there's something else going on. These trees of Eden are, and we know there's 2 trees, but these are separate trees. The 2 trees that we're told about literally are the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But now you have all of these other trees. And this Assyrian is an allegory for Satan and Eden. And when you have all of these branches and the covering and everything that is falling underneath his covering is talking about Satan in the end time, and then how that connects into the beast empires is a significant sort of understanding of this tree allegory, because as I get into this section, I have a chapter 69 called the Thelemic Tree. And that's how the polytheists, they always try and draft things in from the Bible in terms of making their counterfeits. So the Thelemic tree comes from the Greek word thelem, which means God's will. And so in the occult belief that you have free will and, to do anything that you want, is where they sort of take that meaning from. And then they mistranslate it a couple times in a sexual nature. And I'll identify those in that chapter as well, to give you the 2 examples there as a marker for them, because they believe in free sexual will as well, whether it's with them on earth or the angels and their free sexual will. And this Thelemic tree is the will of God, but in their understanding, the will of their celestial mafia godfather. Or the pantheon of gods, however you want to sort of understand that. And the Thelemic tree is broken into 2 different trees that I walk through, and this sort of gets into some of the secret society stuff, but it's important to understand what they believe and how they want to bring about the end times. So they have the genealogical tree, which is one of the thelemic trees. And so in that concept, that is like this elm tree or an ash tree or an oak tree, and understanding biblically ash and elm are kind of used interchangeably, and oak is the holy tree of the Tuatha De Danann, and the Datanu, and that the oak and the ash are part of the trees of Mount Hermon. Just as the oak is used to describe the Amorites in terms of their strength in the book of Amos 2. And this is from their what they would call their gene of Isis, a genealogical tree, and that they have specific genses. So LB gens, which I covered in book 1, which is kind of the royales of the Europe, but more of the northern aspect, and into England and France as well. You have the Julia gens, for example, which is the gens of the black nobility of the Italians, which goes back to the patrician families and Augustus and Caesar, through the senators, back to Romulus and Remus and the specific gods. They have lots of different allegories, not only the gene of Isis, but the fairy gens or the elven gens. This is the gens, and this is the genealogical tree that they track. So that's their invention. And I also take you back where that comes from the incredible line of the kings of Jerusalem crowned in 1118 in a small priory on the rock of Sion. So it gets really sort of a lot of intrigue going there. But the more important one is the organizational structure, which is a cedar tree, an evergreen cedar tree from Mount Hermon. And in that, you have the roots, just as with the ash tree or the elm tree, has roots that's going into Sheol or Hades, which is their heaven. That's where they get their power from. So genealogical, that's the gens sort of source, but the cedar of Lebanon, the cedar of Mount Hermon, is the power and the authority. So just as all of the kings received the divine right to rule from Mount Hermon, that's the source of their power. So you have all of these different trunk organizations, which I give the hierarchy, which I kind of outline in book 1, but I give you the specific from the 13 families down to Freemasonry, and then I show you how the branch organizations intersect into that thelemic tree, and then where they take that thelemic tree back in their occult history and when they start to introduce that. These are their terms. Now, taking that back, understanding of how important trees are, as in the world tree, which is again part of the allegory of the thelemic trees. All these trees in Eden are angelic trees that they're talking about. And the most important one is Satan and his beast empires that extend out of that. And so the occult forces take those two terms and they form their hierarchical structure and their organizations on earth to do, as they say, is as above, so below, because they believe in that type of what's playing out here is the same thing that plays out in the other realm.
That's interesting. And so do you think that that's going to have to do with the end time one world religion? And will these figures that you write about, called the great and mighty men of the end times, what will they have to do with that as well?
Well, yeah. So one of the intriguing things about the Bible is it's written in two languages originally, Hebrew for the Old Testament and Greek in the New Testament, and whether or not they were trying to translate from Aramaic or Hebrew, as they were, I mean, I'll leave that up to other historians, but what we get is Greek. And so it's very difficult to get the cognate terms in sort of that's exactly the application, because you're looking for context and say, how does that link into the Old Testament? It has to fit. So for an example, so in the New Testament, when it has affliction and tribulation for the tribulation aspect of, Revelation 7, Matthew 24:7, Matthew 24:21, Mark 13:19, for example, you can see affliction or tribulation being used, and the word is the Greek word thlipsis. And it's used for two different kinds of tribulations, one for the saints, one for the tribulation of the world not seen since the beginning. And we know it's the same word because where it says in Matthew 24:21, the great tribulation of the world not seen since the beginning of creation, Mark 13:19 uses the word affliction there. Exact same parallel prophecy, and both of those words go back to thlipsis, just as affliction or afflicted does in Matthew 24:28, and just as tribulation in Revelation 7, the tribulation saints goes back to thlipsis as well. And that has a Greek word. That Greek word thlipsis has a cognate word, sarah, transliterated starting with a T in the Old Testament. So in the time of Jacob's trouble, Sarah, they're going to be saved out of this great tribulation. You can start to match things up, and that's the same word, troubled, Sarah. That's when Daniel rises in Daniel 12, which is the midpoint of the last 3.5 years when you have the war in heaven. So he has sat down by inference, and Antichrist has come to power if he is the restrainer, and I think it's a good possibility he is, him or the Holy Spirit. I'm good either way, but seems to fit better with me now, whereas before I used to be on the Holy Spirit side, but now I'm more on the Michael side. Antichrist has come to power. So you can start to use some of those words to say it's marking chronology, and it's the same meaning. There's just, unfortunately, they're in two different languages. So if the giants are going to have something to do with the end time, then we ought to be able to match up terms from the Old Testament with the New Testament. And that's what chapter 62, the great and mighty men of the end time, is about, is saying, how do we know that the kings that are being talked about in Revelation are the same bloodlines or kinds of rulers that were in the beast empires before, other than we know there's a beast empire of the end time, but is this exactly in the same sort of model? And so I make those connections. So, for example, in Joel 1-3, you have the words mighty one being used, just as in Ezekiel 39. And in both of those applications, this is the counterfeit Armageddon and Armageddon as you get into Joel 3. And in Ezekiel 39, these are the mighty ones and the passengers that are connected to the Rephaim through the Hebrew word abar, and Passover and crossover and death, just as sometimes Rapha is 7496 for spirit, demon, shade is associated with death, as in the book of Job and a few other applications. So you have these mighty ones that show up in Old Testament prophecy. So I start to connect those to the words that are used to describe these kings in the book of Revelation. And there's two key words that are used to describe them that are in Greek. So mega and megastranes. And so I start to trace those words back, provide their full meanings and their etymology. And as you take them back, they are going to mean words like, say, mega, for example, is going to mean great, as in great stature, in great age, in mass, in height. And as you take that word as it goes back into the etymology through, I like to use Webster's for my etymology, large, huge, chief, weighty, bloodline descendant. I mean, and I put all of this down. So when it says in Revelation 6:15, the kings of the earth, the great men, that's megas. And so you also have megastranes, which for great men in Revelation 18:23, for example, and that means lords, nobles, grandees, and grandees is from megagistos, which is part of the whole megastanes and megas Greek words. And so I walk through all of that without getting into too much minutia and show you that these are the same people that are described in the Armageddon battle as described in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and these are royales, the kings of God, Rex Deus, as I call them in Book 1. So that's what that's designed to do, is to show you that this end-time beast empire that rises out of the Rephaim beast empires has intimate connections to those beast empires, and that we should expect an influence of not only the descendants of those bloodlines, but we also should be prepared for other interaction of giants, whether or not they're recreated or whether or not these 10 kings, for example, are taking on demons and hosting them to provide them additional power. And so in the occult, they believe they can control demons through rituals and words and somehow bring them in and control them. I don't know whether that happens or not, or it's just they're just not fighting back on the inside, like somebody who says something's come in and possessed me, and it turns really ugly because you're trying to throw that demon spirit out, I would presume, because I've never been possessed, but seems to be the case. So there's a connection there in the end time to these beast empires, just as Ezekiel 32 is talking about these beast empires and these ones that are coming back out of the pit prison before the midpoint of the last 7 years, before the Gog War, before the Joel 1 and 2 War, and before the Armageddon War.
Man, that's so interesting. Well, for everybody at home, we got a lot more to talk about, but we're going to do that in the members only section at dailyrenegade.com. So if you are viewing for free on YouTube or Rumble, head on over to dailyrenegade.com. We're going to continue the conversation. We got a lot more to talk about. One thing that I'm really interested in is the first woe, these scorpion creatures that come out of the abyss. And I definitely want to get Gary's opinion on that. And if you are watching, please head on over to Genesis6conspiracy.com, and that is the number 6, Genesis, the number 6, conspiracy.com, to get more information on this absolutely phenomenal book. So once again, head on over to dailyrenegade.com. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year. If you can do the $100 a year, I suggest doing that because it's cheaper in the long run, and you technically get 2 months free doing it that way. We also, for those of you who have been following us, we have updated the website. It works beautifully now. We got rid of that old Wix website that was giving us so many problems, and we went over to Uscreen, and it looks beautiful. There's even a community tab which runs. It really works a lot like Facebook. So we've all been posting on there, and you can make your own profile. It's really cool. And then the actual video page looks and runs a lot like YouTube, and it has all of our full videos that we can't put on YouTube, mostly because of censorship issues. So if you want all of that, again, head on over to dailyrenegade.com, where we will continue this conversation. So if you are viewing on the website, just hang on the line. You don't have to do anything. We're going to continue in a moment. And for everybody viewing for free, thank you so much. And until next time, take care and God bless. Okay, we are in the members only section. So chapter 63 is called The First Woe, Scorpion Creatures. And this is something I have always been fascinated about ever since I was a little kid and I read Revelation for the first time. I was like, what are these things? This is so interesting. And so I got to get your opinion on this. What are these? Give us the background of the account, and what are these weird creatures that are coming out of the abyss?
Yeah, so they come out just before the midpoint of the last 7 years. And out of that, you have this kind of as an extension, not as a separate role, but maybe an extension of the first role. You have that 200 million man army that takes place.
Yeah.
And that's, I cover that in this section as well. So, but what comes out, you have this king, Abaddon, Apollyon, who leads these scorpion creatures out of the pit prison. And they're going to have stingers on their tail, and people are going to suffer who don't have the seal of God for 5 months, and they're going to search out for death and not have it. And there's certain restrictions that are put on them. They can't destroy the grass and stuff like that. So they have immense power by inference that goes along with this. And, their descriptions are absolutely horrific. And we don't get biblically a whole lot of information on what this might be. But yet we do know you have demons, which these aren't, because these are of a physical nature that are coming out. They're not in sort of a dwelling place or an Orchitarian being prepared for the demonic spirits, or a soul and a body is the Orchitarian, a dwelling place for the spirit in the physical world. Just like there is one in heaven for habitation and house in heaven, where Orchitarian is used 2 times. There are variants of Orchitarian used, but specifically there, 2 Corinthians 5:2, Jude 1:6, habitation for the latter, house in heaven for the first. So they're not demons, and so they have to be fallen angels, because we're not told of anything else, or something perhaps that the giants or the gods created that were so horrible that they put them in there with some sort of angelic technology. But we're not told about that biblically either. So what's interesting about scorpion is you take that back to Hebrew, that's the Hebrew word akrab, A-Q-R-A-B as it's defined. And so that's kind of interesting, because you have in Sumerian mythology the Gurdabalu and the Krabamalu, which are scorpion gods that have the power to destroy the earth. So in the Sumerian tradition, one of the parent gods in their tradition creates these scorpion gods as protectors of the parent god, so the offspring gods don't overthrow them and murder them, is what they talk about. And those are all occult allegories, because you can't kill an immortal being. God could, whatever that means, that he could do to do it, but he's omnipotent, so he's the only one that could kill something that's immortal by its sort of definition. They're not killed. They went to the pit prison. So the fallen angels who committed the same crimes after the flood, let's say the Baalim, the offspring gods, that in polytheism overthrew the parent gods, they committed the same crimes, and they also went to the pit prison shortly after the flood. So probably sometime around Babel or shortly after, and the dispersion. And so one of those crimes would be to create the Rephaim, just as we've talked about on past shows, and as Ugaritic text talks about. So you have only 2 types of beings that we're told that are coming out: demon spirits and fallen angels. So the crab in the Sumerian pantheon are these Akrabamalu, and they were created to protect not only the parent gods, but to protect temples, and to protect palaces, and to protect the gates to Hades or Sheol. And they have the power to destroy the world. So I don't think they were created offspring. I think they're a kind of angel, and a very, very powerful angel. But I think they're degraded angels. Just as satyrs, I think, are seraphim that were degraded to devil goat gods, Azazel being a seraphim, and also called in the occult as a goat god, as in Baphomet or Pan or Bacchus, or all the different goat god names that you can get. I list a number of them in the book as I'm talking about goat gods. And so I think these are another kind of watcher that's degraded. So what types of fallen angels, or what type of angels in the fallen realm were associated with protection, were associated with temples and with palaces? Well, these are cherubs. These are sphinxes. And what's interesting is you have different faces for these different types of cherubs. So you have a bull or an ox, you have a lion, you have a head of a human, and you have sometimes these distorted demonic-like bird-type faces. Those are the faces of a cherubim. So I think they're probably degraded, rebellious cherubim that also probably created giants in their image, like lion men of Moab. as with the lion face, maybe the dark-haired giants out of Sumeria, maybe the Tengu warrior gods in Southeast Asia, the Zabalba and the Kamazots and the Popol Vuh from the bird-face gods. Just as Anunnaki are described as these same types of beings, these Akrabamaloo and Gerdabalu in Sumeria by archaeologists, where you have, and what they're doing the comparison of is where you have these images of these winged humans with a head, the Anunnaki, and with an eagle face. That would be another depiction of a cherub or cherub. And so I think these are degraded cherubim. And so I'm walking people through this to understand what these beings are that are coming out. And then what I do to really sort of nail it is I put a direct 2-column comparative, one on one side of the Revelation 9 descriptions, and then the matching descriptions that come out of the Krabamaloo and the Gerdabalu out of Sumeria, and they're identical. And wow. Then I also, as I go through that, I will show that this is not just a Sumerian understanding from a polytheist perspective. I'll show Egyptian, and I'll show Central American beliefs in that have similar type of God. So it's not just one isolated comparison, but it's that connection to the scorpion from the word, the Hebrew word for scorpion. And also you have scorpions that's in the zodiac that's there. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So.
That's it's fascinating because, we read this stuff and then all of the pieces are there in ancient history to put it all together. And I think you just done a phenomenal job with that in the book. How does this connect with you mentioned the 200 million army, the second and third woes? How does this connect with the first one?
Yeah, so you get the 200 million man army after these beings come out. And so they're somehow connected, right? And so in this army, you get this really crazy army of 200 million population. And they've got really strange riders and really strange beasts that they're riding. And these are both sort of like chimera type of beings. This is angelic technology that we're working on today. And in Chimera Greek history, they created all sorts of creatures that had multiple features of an animal pieced together. So just as I talked earlier in section 2 about the unicorns, I give a description of the unicorn horse that the Nephilim rode on, and their post-diluvian replacement, because they have to be larger than a normal horse to support the weight of these giants. So these are giant beings, and they have all sorts of different things on them. So I'm not saying that what the riders are going to ride in this army are unicorns, but the description is different. But it is still a chimera-like animal, so kind of like angelic technology that they had before the flood. And then as they tried to do with the Nicaean horses, that were the horses of the royals that they wore into battle as well. And so also in that section, I connect the allegory of the cult of the unicorn as also an angelic being that is the equivalent of a cherubim, one that pulls the chariot of the gods in the pantheon, or the cherubs that pull the chariot of God in the visions in the book of Psalms and the book of Ezekiel. So I connect that together earlier on. So now you have this chimera type of army that is created. And this is not a human army. This is not the fallen angels. This is, I think, Oiketarians created for the demonic spirits, and the ones that come out of the abyss and the ones that are roaming that didn't go to the pit prison, because we know not all of them did, and that they are going to be participating in this Gog war that Gog leads, Gog of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech, which is really weird because Gog does not show up in the Table of Nations. Magog does, as part of the descendants of Japheth that moved into the Turkey region as we would know it today, say Asia Minor, and intermarried with the Scythians, who I explained in the book were giants. So it seems like in that case, and with the Elamites and other peoples that are named, they're being named after giants, and or the writers just changed their name to reflect they intermarried with giants or something to that effect. And how I kind of get there in one of the avenues is that Gog was the antediluvian giant, and giants after the flood were lots of times named after giants before the flood, like Gilgamesh, 6th generation after the flood, is the same name as a giant used in the book of Enoch before the flood. And we know Gilgamesh is a second incursion giant because in his narratives coming out of several different languages, he's created by being son of King Lugobanda of Uruk and a fertility goddess Nin. So it's and 2/3 God, 1/3 human. This is not before the flood when this happens. It's clearly talked about after the flood. And in that discourse and that quest that he goes on with Enkidu, they go to the Cedar Forest, which is on Mount Hermon, which people don't realize. And King Hababa is a Chimera king ruling over that with full authority of the pantheon of the gods as a terrible one to do terrible things to humans. It's just an amazing sort of parallel that I also knit together in this book. So when we look at Gog, he is the offspring of the parent god Iapetus. So is Magog. And those are the two names as the chief prince of Meshech. And Meshech is the etymological root for Moscow, which is another interesting coincidence as you start to get into that kind of alliance. And so this is telling us there's something going on. And as I said, this happens after the abyss is open. And how do we know that is that the Gog War is in the last days, as Ezekiel 38 talks about, and the application throughout the Old Testament. That's the end time. It's not Revelation 20. There's 2 Gog Wars. And we also know in Ezekiel 39 that after this Gog War is destroyed, this Gog army is destroyed, you have the second Exodus, which is a second half event that Jacob is saved out of in Micah 37 in the time of trouble that we talked about a few minutes ago, and lots of other passages that go with it. So we have a timing, and then if we look at that as the same war as Joel 1 and 2 and Revelation 9, then we look at these creatures in the Joel 1 and 2 war, and those are really bizarre. So bizarre, they seem to be very similar to the beings described in Revelation 9. So what I do is I put those descriptions in columns side by side, and they're the same chimera creatures.
Wow. Yeah, I love piecing this stuff together and seeing how, everything, if somebody's willing to study or at least pick up a book written by somebody who is willing to study, that there are answers to all of these mysterious things. Well, there's a bunch of more stuff we could talk about, but if we do that, we're going to be here all day. What do you want most? And for the audience, we do have another interview with Gary scheduled, I believe, next month. Yep. So what do you want most for the audience to take away from this interview?
That the more you dig into prophecy and want to understand what is going on, the answers come out of prehistory. And Amen. That if you understand the concept that Jesus warned us about this, that it will be like the days of Noah, and not just the godless aspect, not just the idea that they weren't anticipating the flood was coming, even though they were being warned. We need to understand that the days of Noah were both before the flood and after the flood. And the exact same sort of words in Genesis 9:29, one translated through Greek, one translated through Hebrew into English. And that giants and the gods walked amongst us both before and after the flood. And that they had angelic technology that was provided to the descendants of Cain and the giants that had the ability to destroy the world. And it's the giants who have a perpetual nature of war. So if you want to look at globalists and their perpetual war policies, they sort of match up as you look at the geopolitical nature, and that the violence that was described before the flood is part of those days of Noah, and that violence that shows up again after the flood with the rise of the Rephaim hegemony. And so you have this violence that's caused by the giants and the technology that had the ability to destroy the world, just as we're getting to today. And their goal is to destroy the world, and that they would live in a world renewed through Shiva, as Shiva is a creator god from the ashes of destruction. Just as the phoenix rise out of the ashes, that this world will be made and provided oikotarians for the spirits, offspring of the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim and the Rephaim. And that violence is in the preamble to the flood, and that the whole earth was corrupt. That's the Hebrew word shakath, which means decay, ruin, pervert, destroy. And so the whole earth was, not the sea, the whole earth. That means the plant genomes. That means the animal DNAs. That means human DNAs, except for what was spared to start anew, both and with Noah and the wives, spiritually and physically pure. I think that's my speculation anyways. And so we're led to understand the days of Noah and then match that up with Ecclesiastes 1, that, and this is the terrifying part and why it's so important, is that nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again. And there's a bit more on to that, but you get the understanding that we're seeing these cycles through the Nephilim that would have had beast empires that almost destroyed the war. We get a reprieve. They show up again after the flood through the beast empires, and they're trying to bring about Antichrist and destroy the world and make sure humankind does not reach our destiny to be raised up like angels, and then to judge those angels for the crimes against creation and humanity. And that through the cycles of the beast empires, it's trying to be done all the way through, and it doesn't succeed until Michael sits down. And that's why it's important to understand, because it's going to be unimaginable. The world is not prepared for what was, and it's coming again.
Amen. Yeah, I agree with you. Well, what is the best place people can pick up your book, and how can they follow you online?
Yes, so the best place to buy my book is through my website once I receive my books, and I'm hoping to track down where that shipment is. It's probably held up in customs. And you can go to my website, the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's the number 6conspiracy.com. And then on that website, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1, all 84 chapters of book 2. You can get a signed copy from me through the website. So if you go to book 1, you want to buy that, click on that. Book 2, click on that. And there's a page on each of those for the US, for Canada, and for the rest of the world. So just go to the appropriate page. And there's also connections to Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, BarnesandNoble.com, and the Kindle edition for the digital one. So that's the easiest way to buy the book. And if you're buying multiple books and you wanted to do a bundling, I have bundling for each of the individual books. I'm still working with the website writers to intermix that bundling. But let's say you wanted to buy 5 books, for example, and you wanted 2 of book 1 and 3 of book 2, just buy one of them. They're the same price at that quantity. Send me an email and tell me how you want it split and how you want it signed. And my email address is, you can contact me off the website to contact the author. That is Genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com. Again, the number 6.
Phenomenal. All right. Well, I highly suggest everybody go check that out. Gary, this is always is great talking with you. This has been absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Terrific. And thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And again, for everybody at home, we will have Gary on again next month. So stay tuned for that. And also thank all of you for being members and supporting what we do at Daily Renegade. Love you all. Until next time, take care and God bless. Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Tonight we have a very special guest, Gary Wayne, in the final entry of a series of interviews we've been doing with him over the course of the past few months, based on his new book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Helps Define End Times Prophecy. And I'm very excited for tonight's show because we're going to get into some prophecy. But before we get to that, if you're viewing on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button and click the bell to turn on all notifications. And if you think that you're already subscribed, double check, because a lot of people have been telling me YouTube is removing their subscriptions, so you might have to resubscribe. Okay, so let's get into it. Pleasure to have you back again. How are you doing, Gary?
Doing very well, and happy to be back with you, and looking forward to the conversation. I always like to talk prophecy, so it's I like giants too, but I have more than one passion.
Yeah, same here, and I totally agree. And I think this one is a perfect cap for the past 3 episodes that we've done in this series, and all of which are on YouTube, and the full versions are on Daily Renegade. So, and I think it really helps knowing the prehistory stuff, because it helps define prophecy for us. So on your website, you offer excerpts of, and that's Genesis6conspiracy.com, and the 6 is the actual number 6. So on your website, you offer excerpts of each chapter of your new book. And to open section 6, you write, post-Diluvian history was shaped by the 6 beast empires and will once more be shaped by the end time 7th and 8th beast empires. Can you give us a brief overview of the first 6 empires that will lead into the 7th and 8th?
Yeah. So one of the things that struck me as I dug deeper and deeper into the Bible is that there was a relationship between the end time and with prehistory, and that understanding prehistory would provide context for what happens in the New Testament and with the Old Testament end time prophecy. And so that's what's interesting, about book 2 is that I think for the first few sections, it's absolutely essential information for Christians to understand how much information is provided about prehistory. And then, as I do that, I'm identifying key terms and words that will be providing additional context for end time prophecy, because if we look at Ecclesiastics, where it tells us that not only is nothing new none under the sun, but what was will be again. And additionally, as you move on into, I think, verse 17 or 18 there, it says that, the understanding of this wisdom and this knowledge will bring grief and sorrow. That we need to understand that what happened in prehistory before the flood happened again after the flood. We didn't get to the point of that apocalypse, but we do in the end time. And that there is an ordained time, and God intercedes to ensure that all the names in the book of life written in there before creation have an opportunity to have a chance to leave their name in that book or have it blotted out. And so there is an ordained time. But that doesn't diminish the fact that we're told it will be also like the days of Noah in the larger context of Noah's generation, which was 600 years before the flood, 150 and 350 after. So understanding prehistory helps us to understand these beast empires. And so we get beast empires, and one would presume there was these beast empires before the flood with the giants, because it's the same pattern. They're always trying to bring about an antichrist figure. And one deduces then there would have been an antediluvian antichrist figure. And depending on which model you might get out of polytheism, it would seem that maybe Atlantis would fit that the best with Atlas. Now, there's some other variety of versions that might have been a giant named Orion in the occult and things like that, but it's a constant that they want to do this, and they want to destroy humankind from the face of the earth, and they want to do this again, and they've been trying to do that ever since. So understanding the beast systems or the beast empires is very, very important. And I label them the beast empires as they're labeled in Daniel 7, where we get the empires moving forward, but not the ones previous. So what we're being provided in those beast empires, and it's the same ones provided in Daniel 2 in the metallic empires, but when we get into Revelation, we see the beast of the sea, of the Gentile nations. And one of the things that we need to understand in context with the beast empires is that they all have an intimate relationship with Israel. It's part of the fulfillment of Israel's destiny. And it can either be done through the blessings of the covenant or the curses of the covenant. Unfortunately, we get the curses, because of the violations against Israel, that it will be played out accordingly. So when we look at who these beast empires are, these are the bloodline dynastic orders of the Rephaim hegemony after the flood, which is why it's important to understand all of these nations. They take over the thrones. And so if you look at the metallic empires, where it gives the same four empires, and I'll just name those empires just to get them on the table, is it starts with Babylon, and it's the head of gold in the metallic ones. And you have, following that, Persia and Medes, essentially the same. One comes, takes over from the other, and it's similar intermarriage of the bloodlines and the transition of who's going to be the emperor there. And then you have Greece that follows, and then you have Rome, and then in the end time empire, you'll have 10 kings that rise from the Roman Empire, which is the seventh empire, and the eighth empire is Antichrist, as he's called in the last 3.5 years in Revelation 17. So that's 5 of the 7, right? And then the eighth is the one that comes at the end. So who are the first two? Well, the first one is Egypt. And the reason why we understand Egypt as the first one, it's in relationship with Israel. I'll come to the next one where you can make an argument, but I will always go back to this intimate relationship with Israel. Israel is raised into a nation in Egypt. They get the protection and they get the benefits of this empire that is the most powerful nation at that time until the Pharaoh changes. Until the Pharaoh that Joseph didn't know, and he was equal to Pharaoh at that time. So there's a change, and that's when the persecution sort of starts. And not that, relatively speaking, it's going to be decades. You're going to have the exodus into the land of the covenant. So that's Beast Empire number 1 in the relationship. The second one is in relationship to after the land of the covenant is taken, after the age of the judges, once the monarchy has been in place, you get the Assyrian Empire. And you could maybe take a beast empire back to Nimrod from Babel, and he's the father of the Assyrian nations and the Mesopotamian kingships, and his bloodlines will run through that. But Babel did not have an intimate relationship with Israel. So it's an extension of Babel, but it's the Assyrian Empire followed by Babylon and Persia, which are again akin to the Babel Empire. But Babel is the understanding for Antichrist as an archetypical figure with Nimrod, having complete control of the Noahites. Babel is the root word for Babylon, as we get that as it shows up. It's the religion of Nimrod, and the daughters of Babel or Babylon, which are the religions of the beast empires moving forward. But it's I lean to Assyria as being the defining nature, because in 721, through the curses of the covenants, with the violations of the covenant, the northern tribes are taken into exile. Judah would have gone as the southern kingdom, and they split after King Solomon. For people wondering where I'm getting two nations from here, they split into the northern and the southern nations after King Solomon. And Judah repents. So they get a stay of the curses, providing they're going to keep following the covenant. So Assyria takes Israel into dispersion, into exile, and then they get lost into the four corners of the earth. They're spread right across the earth, and we won't hear about them until the end time. Once the seventh empire arises, expect lost Israel to start to awaken, probably with the 144,000. You know, and I think one of the markers for that is that they come from the tribes of Israel. And they're going to be preaching to the whole world, but they're trying to awaken the lost tribes in preparation for reconciliation and Exodus in the second half. And so the next thing that I would sort of add on to this is that the southern kingdom will fall under the curses of the covenant under Babylon in about, say, circa 589 BC, plus or minus 2 or 3 years either way on the dating, and they're going to be taken into exile. And then under the Persian kings, they're going to be permitted to go back. And then under the Greek Empire with Alexander, they're going to reign over Israel, as they do everywhere. And they're going to actually do a kind of abomination as a prototype for the end time, not the or the ha abomination, using a mix of Hebrew and English, whereas in ha Elohim, or ha Satan, it's the, not, as a definite, as the one we want to stay focused on. Just as you have in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, you get the statue that's going to be raised, and he also desecrates the temple. So we see these Antichrist wannabes through the beast empires trying to bring about this Antichrist, and that if it wasn't for Michael fighting against the beast empires, he doesn't prevent them from coming to power, but from Antichrist from coming to power until the ordained time. They would have brought this about beforehand, but they keep trying. And then so you have, after the Greek Empire, it gets split into 4 sections, and out of that is Rome, and Rome takes over and succeeds as the Iron Empire that's going to mix with clay in the end time. So in the time of the Roman Empire, you have the dispersion of and the destruction of Jerusalem in the time of the Messiah and the crucifixion. So you see this intertwining of Israel and the beast empires. They're wedded together, so that when the fruition of this age in the last 7 years, as Daniel 9:27, when all prophecy and vision is going to be fulfilled for this age, and excluding the millennium, which is another 1,000-year period, you're going to see another beast empire rise up. Now, this is not in conflict, as what some people will say, or an either or with Daniel 8, where they say that's where the 7 empires come from. It's both. So when it's using the Greek Empire against Persia at that time, and that Antichrist will somehow come out of the Greek Empire, but that includes Rome as well, as we just talked about. So it can't be too specific of where the Antichrist comes from, because it's a large area that the Greek Empire was. And so you have, in this analogy of what happens in Revelation, is you have Alexander and Greece as the first empire, split into 4 after his death is 5. Rise of Rome is 6. The end time empire that equally sort of will come from end time empires that will equally come from Rome and Greece, with a connection with the 8th empire to Antichrist with Greece. That is the same number. So it provides more information about the end time and the beast empires. And I think Revelation nails it as a beast, because it is this Hydra Leviathan type empire that comes out of the sea, which in biblical Old Testament prophecy are the Gentile nations. And that Israel tends to be sort of the earth, as sort of the other flip side to that coin, just as the northern tribes of Israel are understood as the vine in prophetic allegory, and the tribes even. So you can have that vine allegory expressed with specific prophecies to Ephraim as well, for example, as part of the northern kingdom. And the southern kingdom is the fig tree. And an allegory for why Jesus destroys the fig tree in the book of Matthew and Mark, because it's bearing no fruit. And then he goes into his finishing of his commission, and he starts to lay down the destruction of the temple, and then goes later, almost immediately after, from a chronology point of the Gospels lays down the end time oratory. So you have this fulfillment coming with this Leviathan monster that's coming out of the sea, that's represented as a beast, just as Antichrist is also a beast of the beast empires. And it is showing that it has 10 horns or 10 kings, and it's the same empire that's shown in Revelation 13 that comes out of the sea, that's pictured in Revelation 12 at the time of the abomination and the war in heaven and the attempted elimination of the people fleeing from Judea at that time. It's at the midpoint of the last 7 years, and the same depiction as the 10 kings and the 7, the 10 and the 7 empires that are shown in Revelation 17. So everything sort of comes together in that imagery for the end time. And not only will church prophecy be fulfilled in a parallel track, but covenant prophecy will be filled out in another parallel track that brings it to a nexus point at the Supper of the Lamb.
Yeah, it really shows how important prehistory and history is to our understanding of prophecy. And speaking of which, this is something that I've always been curious about, and I'm still kind of on the fence on because I've heard so many good arguments on a lot of different ends. But when do you see the Gog and Magog war taking place, and what does that have to do with Meshach and Tubal?
Yes, great question. So there are several theories on the timing of Ezekiel 38 and 39, and we should read them as one prophecy. It's separated into 2 chapters. You just get sort of the beginning of the war and then sort of the ending of the war in Ezekiel 39. But Ezekiel 39 has such juicy details in it that you want to make sure you read it all. So the one theory is that we get a Gog war mentioned in Revelation 20. So it's probably that war from that sort of theory. And then the other one is the battle descriptions are so similar to Armageddon, it's probably the Armageddon battle. And I get that, and you can make a pretty good argument for it, except that doesn't fit quite all the details, not only within the prophecy, but other prophecies. And for me, I think prophecy should fit like a glove, and there aren't any contradictions, and you should look for some of the timing markers that are in there. So in Ezekiel 38, we're told that this war happens in the last days, which is a common term used for the last 7 years or the end time throughout the Old Testament. So we know it's not at the end of the millennium by that sort of determination, but then when does it happen, and is it Armageddon? Well, when you get into the details of Ezekiel 39, it's talking about the destruction of this army, and then you have second Exodus. Well, people will say, well, that's Armageddon, and then the second Exodus will happen at the start of the millennium. Except that you have this other detail in Ezekiel 38 to sort of worry about and mesh, and then look at the other prophecies. So when you get into end time prophecy with second Exodus, you get this in the time of Jacob's trouble in Micah 37. And this is the same word, Hebrew sarah, as in the time of trouble in Daniel 12, when you have the resurrection of the dead that a lot of people sort of refer to as a church prophecy. But this is for Daniel's people. So it's not, it's for Israel. And there is a resurrection predicted for Israel and Judah, and it has to do with the second Exodus. And this time of trouble is the cognate word for the Greek word thalipses, which is tribulation. And there's 2 different tribulations as are used in end time prophecy. There's one that's used for the first 3.5 years, maybe 3 years or so even before, for the tribulation of the saints. We see that showing up as afflicted in Matthew 24, about verse 7. That's the Greek word thalipses, and it's the same word that's used to translate for tribulation. And so this is the tribulation of the saints, in Revelation 7 that come out of the great tribulation of the saints, that the ones in Revelation 6 are the first fruits are waiting for the additional martyrs to come out, and part of the first fruits that includes the 144,000 and the two witnesses for the resurrection sequence. Now, as we sort of move that forward to the Great Tribulation, as Matthew 24:21 talks about, it's a tribulation not seen since the creation of the world versus the tribulation of the saints. We have a parallel passage in Mark 13:21 that describes the same destruction not seen since the beginning of the world, but the word there is afflicted, which goes back to Philipses as well. So there's two different words for tribulation. It means the same meaning as in Sarah in trouble in the time of Jacob's trouble. It means tribulation. It means affliction. It means persecution. There's a persecution for the saints and a persecution for the tribes of Israel, but all are to be saved from the wrath, which is the year of the Lord's wrath. So the timing of the Exodus, the second Exodus, is after Antichrist has come to power. And that we get a lot of passages that come out of the Old Testament, particularly in Isaiah 27, 28, 43, and there's another one where you have this huge scourge that's going to sweep Israel and Exodus away, and they're being led by Jehovah, who I believe is the word Jesus, leading the Exodus along with King David, and probably Elijah is part of that as well, as part of leading Israel to the wilderness for their judgment and resurrection. And this happens after the time of the rapture. And this is a time when Jesus is going to break them out of their prisons in the time of the year of the Lord's favor. And so in Ezekiel 37, and the timing is kind of important as it associates with this other war, is that you get this resurrection of Israel. And this is and that's the dry bones. And then you get the second Exodus after that as part of the same passage. So you have a resurrection and you have an Exodus all there for this judgment that Daniel 12 is talking about. That's that time of Sarah or tribulation. And in Micah 37, this is the time of Jacob's trouble, but they're going to be saved out of it. So they're saved from the year of the Lord's wrath. So it happens in the year of the Lord's favor, in the year before the year of the Lord's wrath. So as we look at the timing and how that now fits into Ezekiel 38 and 39, it's suggesting a second half, and it's a reconciliation of Israel because they recognize Jesus as their Messiah and their Redeemer, and they repent in preparation for the second Exodus. And this happens after Jesus' sign, and they recognize them as the one that they pierced. And I walk through all of these kinds of details in section 7. And so now, if you look at those details, and it's before the war happens, before second Exodus, that is saying it's going to be either at the midpoint or before, because Armageddon follows after the second Exodus. So what other passages do we have that sort of align with this war? Well, Joel 1 and 2 is describing this war of this greatest army that's never been before, the largest ever. And it happens before Armageddon, which it moves on to the Armageddon battle after this war in Joel 3. So if you look at the distinctions, and there's mighty ones that are being talked about in each, another connection to some of the bloodlines and the Gibor, but I don't want to get down that rabbit trail here. I'll try and stay linking this all together. So what's interesting is about those creatures in Joel 1 and 2, which is this massive war that isn't Armageddon, is that they are identical to the war, identical to the chimera creatures of the riders and the horses in Revelation 9 that happens before the two witnesses are killed at the midpoint of the last 7 years, because it's the one who comes up out of the abyss who kills the two witnesses. And it's before the seventh trumpet, which happens, after the death of the two witnesses. You get the announcement of the days of the seventh trumpet in Revelation 10, but you get the two witnesses, and then I think 11:15, you get the trumpet blowing for the seventh trumpet, where it's going to complete all of the things for the trumpet. And so you have this war that's connected to the opening of the abyss. It's not directly saying any of these creatures come out of the abyss, but it's kind of an extension of it. It's not part of the first woe, but it's sort of kind of like a connection back to it. So this happens before the midpoint of the last 7 years, because Antichrist is going to be also connected in Revelation 17 as the one that comes up out of the abyss. There's a connection there. So the timing puts it in as the counterfeit Armageddon that Antichrist is going to require, and with a legitimate Antichrist figure, Gog, as you take that back to Hebrew and Greek, it's partly defined as an end-time Antichrist-like figure, and it's got to be so plausible, both the Antichrist and the war, that people will believe Antichrist is the Messiah. And this is the deception that even the elect will be deceived by. It will be so plausible. And this is the time of the temptation in trial in Revelation 3 that we're going to be saved from, which is the midpoint and the mark of the beast. So all of it sort of ties in perfectly with the timing if you let the pieces come together. So, yeah, it's such an interesting question. When is the timing of that war? Because it's so like the Armageddon war, but it's like, and this is in the trumpet, so this is the closest sort of size of catastrophe that you're going to get before all flesh would be killed, except that Jesus will step in. So as you go through the sorrows of the last years of catastrophes, of pestilence, famine, earthquakes, wars, and rumors of war, those get to be stronger and happen more quickly as we get through the generation. And if we were to have a war that killed 5% or 10% of the population of the earth and destroyed that much of the earth, that would be looked at as apocalyptic. But yet that's not going to be the Gog War or Armageddon. And once you get to the trumpets, it's 25% destruction. So there's going to be a war like that looks apocalyptic. And even so much so as the princes and the elite are going to hide in their underground caves and fortresses and tunnels because they think it's the day of the Lord, as Revelation 6, but it's not. There's still the trumpets to come. And then that's not Armageddon. There's still where everything would be destroyed. So it just sort of works sort of perfectly if you let the details and the chronology flow, and that chronology comes from Jesus.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. I've never heard of the Gog, Magog war and all these other things being described as a type of false Armageddon, but that makes so much sense. And yeah, you're right. Think how deceiving that would be for people going through that time, and then they see the Antichrist supposedly as this savior or Messiah figure. And yeah, so it makes sense why, it's like 1 second they're hiding in the caves and it's the day of the Lord, and the next second they're not repenting of their idolatries and stuff. It makes a lot of sense. That's fascinating. You mentioned the mighty men. Who are the great and mighty men of the end times, and are the giants going to return during this time?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, I mentioned in the Joel Wars that it mentions the mighty men or Gabor, but you also get the mighty men in the details of the destruction in Ezekiel 39, right? And so Gabor is used to describe giants in a lot of applications, not all, but a lot. And so there's an association there that I think we want to look for a cognate word in Greek in the New Testament. I always thought, and I'm a whiner, but I always thought it would be so much easier to connect the Old and the New Testament if they were both written in the original source language of Hebrew, so that you don't have to try and figure out, does this match with that? Because, you don't have the same words. You'd have that consistency if you did have it in both. So, yeah, there's some words that are used in the book of Revelation like the kings of the earth and the great men, and they're used in Revelation 6 and Revelation 19 and Revelation 18, where it's mentioning this ruling elite. And those words tend to go back to Greek megas and megastranes, are the two words that are used, and they're kind of related. And what they mean is great, yes, that's the first part. But as you take that back in its fuller meaning into Greek, in the etymology that goes with it, it means large, it means huge, it means chief, it means weighty as in stout, but I use as one of the descriptions, and as Antichrist is called stout. It means bloodline descendants. And then, Megastanes is basically lords and nobles and grandees. And grandees is sort of the key word from another Greek word, 3176, megistos. And it means very great and greatest. But as we look at megastranes, it's going to mean a word that means not only grandees of a kingdom, but also lofty and majestic and an old pedigree from a genealogical perspective. So what we're seeing is these kings of the earth and the oligarchs are bloodlines of the beast empires that are going to rule things. And these are the ones that are talked about in Revelation 6 that are running the world, and they think it's the day of the world. And these are the ones that are being slaughtered, not only in the war of the Gog War as the bulls of Bashan, but also as these mighty men, as they're called, and nobles and royals in Revelation 19 at Armageddon. And that term, bulls of Bashan. So you can look at that from the Ugaritic text perspective, that Bashan is at the foot of Mount Hermon. It's in the Mount Hermon region. And that the Baalim ruled from Mount Hermon, and they were called bulls. And so what's also interesting is that they had, as I cover off in the first half of the book, they had an assembly of the gods there, but also the assembly of the giants, the assemblies of the Datanu, which included the Raphaim. And Datanu, I won't go through the whole etymology, but it's connected to giants all around the world, from Tuatha De Danann to the Titans, as you understand, the transliteration of T's and D's as they go across cultures. So a D and a T can be the same pronunciation and the same letter. So Datanu, D-I-T-A-N-U, you could look at that as T-I-T-A-N-U, and Titan of the heavens, Titan. Anu is heaven in Sumerian. And so you have a council of these dynastic royales that are also called bulls. And so when you look at the term for giant as it comes from Nephilim, it can mean a giant, tribe of giants, a tyrant, or tyrannos, or bully. And so when you look at the larger definition to giant, because they were also called bulls before the flood, so they're the same term that goes with them after the flood. It describes these dynastic rulers as bullies and offspring of bulls. And so when you see bulls of Bashan in the Bible, you try and distinguish, are they talking about just disembodied spirits of the giants, or is it the fallen angels? And there's bulls of Bashan that are around the crucifixion at the time of Jesus. So this is a term that pops up more often than what people would know. Tyrannos, just out of interest, goes back to Anatolian for Indo-Aryan giant kings as Tarwanos, or with an A, T-R, as a transliteration, and to the Assyrian Gyges kings, which is rooted in the word giant, Gyges, and the Gyges kings that produce kings like Gog and Tubal, which are connected to the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war in Meshech, just as Gog is the chief prince of Gog of Magog, chief prince of Meshech. Gog doesn't have a standing within the Bible except in that prophecy. In other words, Magog is a patriarch from Japheth, but Gog doesn't show up. But Gog is a giant, both before and after the flood. And before the flood, he's the son of Iapetus and Clydo, that produces Gog, Magog, and Albion. But giants after the flood often are named with the same name as giants before the flood, like Gilgamesh, born 6th generation after the flood, son of King Lugabanda and the fertility goddess Nin. And he also shows up as a Gilgamesh in the book of giants of Enoch before the flood. So again, we see this sort of constant if we look for some of those patterns. And so Tyrannos is the Herculides bloodlines of the Gyges kings, or Gyes as it would be in its plural nature. Hercules is the patriarch to that bloodline, son of Alchemy and Zeus after the flood. So you get all of these sort of connections that go back to the royales, and these are the mighty kings of the earth and the great men in the end time, as you look for Megastranes and Megas as being comparable words for the bloodlines of the Rephaim kings after the flood and for the mighty ones that would describe them. I know that was a lot of information.
Oh, no, it's absolutely fascinating. I just had to clear my throat for a second, so sorry for the pause. But yeah, no, that's fascinating, and I'm really glad that we've saved that for the end part of the series, because if people go back and watch the other 3 interviews that we've done, we've talked a lot about that too, and that'll help really flesh this out even more, which is great. And something else that you mentioned, and this has always been one of the most fascinating prophecies to me, and I don't know why this one specifically, but it's just always intrigued me. And I have a specific question for you about it that actually came from one of my viewers that I surprisingly did not catch until recently, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on it. But the first woe of the scorpion creatures. What can you tell us about these? What are these things? And you mentioned that you connect that with Joel, which I have too. And just for a brief, I'm going to read a passage here about it, because I recently did a video about the connection between Joel and the Locust Army, and it gets into weird stuff like CERN and stuff like that. But it's a totally different video than this is. But in that, a viewer on the Daily Renegade website actually posted a question that I hadn't thought about before. So when describing these things in Joel, one of the descriptions, it says, a fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is as the Garden of Eden before them, and behind them is a desolate wilderness, yea, and nothing shall escape them. So it makes it sound like they're destroying the wilderness, yet in Revelation 9, it says that they're not permitted to touch any green thing or anything. So yeah, what are... Yeah. So, like, what are these things, and then how do you think about like those two passages?
Two different beings.
Okay.
Connected, but not the same. So, what we look at when we see, and I put this up in section 6 in a couple of the chapters for what I'm going to refer to as 2 columns. So I'll list the descriptions described in Joel 1 and 2. Side by side with the descriptions of the riders and the horses in Revelation 9 and the 200 million man war. They're identical. But these are not humans. These are like chimera creatures. They're physical chimera creatures. And they are part of the DNA manipulation, I think, part of the rising military technology, and probably clone bodies that are chimera-like or giant-like for the terrible ones who are in the pit prison, that are the disembodied spirits of the worst of the giants that are coming out, and also chimera bodies for disembodied spirits that weren't in the pit prison. And if you want to know the passage where you can look at these terrible ones as the Arit or the Retim, as you go ones as in the plural, as in giant ones, or Nephilim, or Rephaim and Seraphim, the serpent ones, and using the male plural. You have these ones that are slain on the earth for doing terrible things, and you have like Tubal and Meshach in there as well, right? That are going to come out from the pit prison when that pit prison is open. And I think they will be the leaders for this Gog war. And that you will also have let's call it a kind of being like the ancient understanding of a unicorn horse. That was a horse that giants rode on into battle. But this is different by the description. It's a different chimera. Unicorns were a chimera being, but they look different than this. But this is going to be an advanced technological creature for these beings to sit on and ride in. There's going to have advanced technical weapons, and they can destroy things that the ones who come up out of the abyss as physical beings, as opposed to disembodied spirits, aren't allowed to destroy the earth. So they're two different beings by the details. There's not contradiction, but they're and the descriptions of the ones that are the scorpion beings in that have first come out under the leader of Abaddon and Apollyon, their description is different than the riders and the horses. Subtle, but different. And the locust army is an allegory for a great army, and it's used several times, and I highlight that term locust armies and when they're used in the first parts of the book, and then we'll connect that into this Joel 1 and 2 war and how that connects into Revelation 9 and Ezekiel 38 and 39. So these things that come out are the other ones that Ezekiel 32 talks about that are in the pit prison, and that's the mighty, which is El, as in the fallen angels. And so these are fallen angels that are led by Abaddon Apollyon. That, I make the case is Azazel is the leader of the Watchers, as we get that out of the book of Enoch. But whoever the leader is, he leads these crazy scorpion beings that are going to plague the earth and sting people for 5 months, and they're going to seek death, but aren't going to be able to achieve death. And that the only ones that they're not allowed to punish are those with the seal of God on them. So we know that includes the 144,000 who have a seal. And I pray and hope that that is like the seal that we have as being faithful of Jesus, that we have the seal of God on us that will protect us. But there will be this destruction on the earth of these beings. And these are something that we don't really get told about in the Bible, but there is a key that they're a scorpion, and the Hebrew word for scorpion is a crab, ACHURAB. Now, what's interesting about that is there are some beings that are talked about in Sumerian mythology, in Central American mythology and religious natures, and in Egyptian and other places around the world that describe a similar being. And they're called in Sumeria the Akraba Malu and or the Gerta Balu. And there's reliefs, etchings all over the Middle East with these creatures. And so what I do is I take those descriptions and I put them in one column of what comes out of Revelation 9 and these ones, and they're identical. So what are these things that are recorded in prehistory in other religions? Well, the standard sort of allegory of their history is that, and I'll use the Sumerian one, is that Tiamat, consort of Absu before the flood, created an order of warrior kind of beings, and they're called the Gerta-Balu or the Krabba-Malu, depending on which language you're taking that out of, in that they were created to protect the thrones. They were created to protect the palaces. They were created to protect the temples and the gateways to the other world. And so it's amazing that you have these beings that are identical to what the Bible talks about. So there must have been these beings in prehistory. And you also see these things in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So they're even around a short time after the flood. Seemingly, and they have the power to destroy the world, which is why restrictions are put on them. And so I make a case that these might be cherubim, and here's how I get there. One is that if you look at Anunnaki release in the Middle East, you see them doing this ritual around this, what some people might term as a technology, or I've heard it as the tree of life as well, but they're doing rituals with these crystals or pine cones in these bags and stuff like that. And there's two different kinds of those depictions. It's the same ritual, just different kinds of beings, similar but different. The only difference, I mean, they both have wings, they're both of these stocky creatures or giant like. One has the face of a human that looks like a dark-haired Gilgamesh or Nimrod, as they're typically depicted as, and the other one has a eagle's or a bird face. Well, in these kinds of creatures, that is classified by some researchers as part of the Akraba Malu. And so cherubim have a bird face, a human face, a lion face, and a bull face. And when they take their physical form, create their oikotarian, they would take one of those heads. So the extension would be as if they had produced giants that say like a Gilgamesh, that maybe the mother goddess Nin was a cherubim and had a human face and passed on the dark hair and big dark beard versus the red hair and blonde hair. But if they had a bird face, then they would create offspring like that. But getting away from that sort of rabbit hole is, because I said that's almost a show in itself, but these aren't what walk out of the pit prison, even though they're equated by some researchers as the same. So we get another analogy that's in the Bible that I think helps explain who these are. The Watchers include seraphim, cherubim, ophanim, and archangels. And the seraphim we know as dragon-faced, serpent, six-winged angels. And then we get these really weird things that fallen angels like Azazel are equated with, which are goat gods, satyrs. And satyr is the Hebrew word, compounded word for a devil goat god, and it's compounded with sa and sarah for meaning hairy, and words like that, and air, and a hairy goat as well, and air, which is the Hebrew word for watcher, as watcher is translated from Daniel 4 out of air in Hebrew. So Sair is some sort of hairy watcher. Has to be one of the four. And yet in the occult, they have these goat gods that are associated with angels that we would understand as seraphim. So I think those are degraded seraphim. And not all of them went to the pit prison right away. But we see these goat gods show up after the flood. And we have satyrs talked about in the Bible in Isaiah 13 and Isaiah 34. And they're going to be back again dancing at the destruction of Babylon in Isaiah 13 and also in Isaiah 34. So I think they're coming out of the abyss. But also these other ones, and I think these are degraded cherubim watchers that did the same crimes as the seraphim watchers. So that's my speculation, but I lay a case out with the details and provide biblical passages that I think will surprise people.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, and I just love this stuff. I have more I want to ask specifically about the second and third woes, but before I do, where can people get your book and find you online?
Yeah, so the best way to find my book or get a hold of me is through my website at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6, the number 6conspiracy.com. And on that website, there's a contact the author. So, I have documents. I have one that's on the Akraba Malu, if people want that, for example. name it by topic or just ask a question. It'll take me for a while, about 2 months to get back as I whittle down that time frame. I spent a month just mailing books, trying to catch up on all the orders, and I appreciate the orders, but you can't do everything. So I'm a little bit behind on the emails. I'll try and get that down to 3 to 4 weeks as it used to be. And I do emails every day, so I do try and keep up. So ask for the document by topic or ask a question. Just be patient. I will get back to you. And if you wanted to find out about the book, as you mentioned, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1, all 84 of book 2, and it's just a drop in the bucket of what's in the book. And if you wanted to buy a book, the best way is to go right over to the Buy Now page for book 1 or book 2. And on the buy now page for book 1 or book 2, there's a Canadian page, a US page, and an international page if you want to buy a signed copy. So if you're in the US, go to the US page. If you're in Canada, go to Canada. If you're anywhere else in the world, go to the international page and you can buy a signed copy for me. And the same for book 2. And there you can link over to the Kindle edition from that buy page as well. There's an icon to get the digital. And there's a link over to barnesandnoble.com, and amazon.ca and amazon.com if you want to buy the book through them. I'm fine either way. I need the distribution. I just can't physically ship enough books to make it go. So that's the easiest way to get a hold of my book. And there's discounts on the website if you want to buy multiple books. So if you buy 2, there's a discount, and it's what I save on the shipping costs, because shipping is a very large expense. And if you wanted to get a discount for a mixed bundle, Stripe's not been able, and my website people have not been able to mix the bundles yet. But let's say you wanted 4 books as an example, and there's different quantity levels there, and you just buy 4 books of either book 1 or book 2, then send me an email at genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com. That's the contact the author page when you're sending me an email, and say, I want to get 2 of each or 3 of one, or if you want to buy just 2, I want 1 of each and I want them signed this way. Just send me that email. I'll wait a day or so waiting for emails to come in after people have made the purchase so that I can make sure that I'm shipping them what they want. So until I get that bundled connection where I think it'll have to be an extra page where we can do that, then that's the way you get the discount, by buying a mix of both books.
Excellent. Well,
one last thing. Audio has been, I'm confident in saying there'll be an audio book for book 1 by the end of June, maybe into July. It's going to be about 60 hours on the audio, and it's a complicated book, and that's why it's not been done before, but we're done. And it's going to be available through Amazon on ACX with another production company that's doing it. I'm not doing the reading. I don't have time for it. And book 2 will come out August or September on audio, and I'll have links to the audio up on my website when that happens.
All right, fantastic. Well, I highly suggest everybody go check that out. It is, once again, Genesis6conspiracy.com, and it is the number 6, Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Okay, well, we got some more to get to, but for all of you at home, if you'd like to check out the rest of this interview, head on over to dailyrenegade.com and get a subscription today. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year. And if you can do it, I suggest the $100 a year because it's cheaper in the long run. Essentially, you get 2 months for free. Daily Renegade was created as a place to protect our videos against censorship because we were having videos, even entire channels deleted, which is why we typically only put the first part of interviews on YouTube, and then we do bonus questions for Daily Renegade members. Also, as an added perk with your membership, you will get early access to all videos. So, for example, if you're viewing this on YouTube, members of Daily Renegade have had access to this video since about 2 weeks ago. So head on over to dailyrenegade.com and get a membership, and we'll continue our conversation with Gary Wayne over there. If you're viewing on the website at dailyrenegade.com, just hang on the line. You don't have to do anything. And for everyone else viewing for free, thank you so much. Take care, and God bless. All right, we are in the members only section. Thank all of you for being members and supporting what we do here. So let's jump right back into our conversation with Gary Wayne. All right, what can you tell us? So that's like a really good, fascinating explanation of the first woe. What can you tell us about the second and third woes?
Yeah, so The second woe happens in the end of the commission of the two witnesses, and it happens just before the seventh trumpet. And so the three woes will happen in all of the days of the trumpet. So Revelation 9 is a trumpet, and the sixth trumpet, and then you have the seventh trumpet. The seventh trumpet is announced as the days of the trumpet, when the mystery of God is going to be fulfilled in Revelation 10. And then you get the seventh trumpet sounding after the death of the two witnesses. And the two witnesses are killed by the one that comes up out of the abyss. So it's not clear whether or not is that a fallen angel, or is that Antichrist that's going to kill the two witnesses and then come to power, which happens in Revelation 13 and technically Revelation 12, because Antichrist is going to be in power. That's the time of the abomination. He hasn't destroyed Babylon yet, but I think what you're getting is some of these details that are sort of extrapolating on this, but we have to be open to that. This could be like Azazel is the one who's going to kill, or Abaddon Apollyon, which I think is the same, that could kill the two witnesses, and that's the second woe, and that is something else, and that's because it's the end of the period of the trumpets and the seals of this tribulation that is going on, and you're going to have the resurrection of the first fruits that are going to happen shortly thereafter. And so this woe comes with, at first you have this great celebration around the world. And I would expect that some of the prophecies that these two witnesses are going to provide just before their death is going to talk about the last 3.5 years as part of the curse prophecies, as I like to call them. There's a certain breed of prophecies that are a curse embedded into a prophecy, like the serpent seed, for example, or the Canaan curse would be an example of that. So, and this is the time when these angels are talking, that we're not told what they say of what's going to be coming on the world, but it's going to be so horrific that this is considered the woe, that the time of repentance is over, and that salvation will only come through fire thereafter, and those who aren't going to worship the mark of the beast. And then the seventh trumpet happens, and that's when Antichrist, comes to power. So it is starting a cycle of massive amounts of change in a transition from the seventh empire to the Antichrist. And in Revelation 17, there's an hour that they hand their power over to Antichrist. And the first thing that Antichrist is going to do after he is handed power is he is going to probably, and to me it's not sure, I won't say that he kills the two witnesses, because it's not clear to me that he does, although you can make that inference. But what we do know is he's going to destroy Babylon next. And that's why we get this announcement to come out of Babylon. And Babylon's destruction is first announced in Revelation 14. And it's after the 144,000 are in heaven. By inference, they're martyrs as first fruits, and they're called the first fruits. And so are the two witnesses. So the time frame is about the same. And the first event is the destruction of Babylon. And Babylon is destroyed in an hour there, just as the details of that Babylon destruction in Revelation 18 will say it's that hour of destruction. In Revelation 12 is about this great war that happens after Antichrist comes to power, because he's also working with Satan to try and destroy fleeing Judea from Jerusalem. And that this is when we're told that, woe is the world after the war, because Satan comes down to the earth. and all the fallen angels are going to be there in the last 3.5 years. And it's the time that Antichrist in Daniel 8:10 goes into heaven to try and raise his throne like all Antichrist figures, and as Satan tried to do in heaven. So he's part of that war. So he's in power. He actually throws down some of the starry host. So you have the two witnesses and starry host being trampled on by Antichrist and the fallen angels at about the same time. And that's called a woe. Is that this third woe? Part of it, but also in I mentioned the destruction of Babylon, and it says twice, alas, 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 or woe, 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 depending on how you want to translate it. It's the same Greek word for both, and that Babylon's destruction seems to be part of that woe and all part of the days of the trumpet. So I would say the third woe, which we're not clearly told, is a combination of what happens after the two witnesses as sort of the fulfillment of what has happened before is awful, but what's coming next is even worse.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I absolutely love this conversation and conversations like these, and there's a lot more that we could talk about. We haven't even scratched the surface of the of everything you have in Section 6, and I specifically left out Section 7 from this episode, which is all about the fig tree generation, because I don't want to give the entire book away. I want people to get the book, so maybe we can cover that at some point down the line in the future. But to close this out tonight, I mean, there's a lot of different, and just for the audience at home, I have questions on my list that we didn't get to, because if we did, we'd be here another 3 hours. But in Gary's book, he talks about the Dragon Kingdom of Heaven, the New Templars, the Thelemic Tree, Jesuits, all sorts of stuff that is really fascinating and tie into all this. But so I highly encourage people to get the book. So to close this out tonight, though, what do you want most for people at home to take away from this interview?
Yeah, the first thing is that if we are in the fig tree generation, and I think we are, then we're not going to be able to rely on our churches to lead us properly. And I think in the last pestilence, we saw that they were woefully vacant. And they're told not to teach prehistory and prophecy. And so they're preparing the church for deception and the falling away that is going to happen. And they're going to be part of the falling away. And so our protection is to put on our own armor of God and to get more familiar with the Bible. So what I try and do with my research is connect dots for people and get people curious to read and verify themselves. Be a contrarian like I am, or like I signed the books on for book 2, be a Berean and check out the veracity just as they did, as what Paul was saying. Because what we're going to see is unimaginable. No matter how much we've been told in Scripture, we can't really imagine, because unless we witness the days of Noah, when the giants and the fallen angels walked amongst us and the world was almost destroyed and the Adamites were almost wiped from the face of the earth except for God's intercession, that's all coming about again. And so we need to understand how prehistory talks about our beginning, and it's relevant to understand that as Adamites, we were created as a resolution to the angelic rebellion, which comes to a fruit, to climax at in the last 7 years. And so that's our resonetra. And so what I try and do is provide a map. And one of the things I do in the preface is I provide my approach to prophecy. And they're just guideposts, but they're guidepost disciplines. It'll allow you to do research if you're disciplined in that approach. And one of the problems I have with eschatology is one, there's endless seemingly approaches to it. Everything's biblical, as they say, but they don't agree. They don't agree on much of anything. There's even within their approach, there's variations, and there's going to be some of that no matter what, because we can't know everything, but we can certainly look at things sort of directionally. So what I do is I demonstrate my approach in the last section and show you how Scripture ties together. And if you allow Scripture to flow, it just fits like a puzzle. So I would encourage people that be prepared that some of my views may not be what your conclusions are, because I don't fall into a specific approach. And my approach is quite simple, and I put everything around what Jesus said, and I explain that, and then I demonstrate it, and including the book of Revelation that people say you can't put around the chronology. Well, of course it has to be, because it's the testimony of Jesus given to the angel to show John. It has to fit. You just can't ignore that. So otherwise, why would we listen to it, right? It has to fit perfectly. And I would say to people that look for things that you want to be aware of in eschatologic prophecy approach. I'm not going to get eschatology out for some reason. And some of those things are, if they don't put everything around what Jesus said, there's a problem with that. And don't define what Jesus said by what the other prophets said. Define the prophets by what Jesus said, because it's his word. So if you do that, you start to go forward, and that don't fall into the trap that Jesus only laid down a topical order, as a lot of people like to reimagine what Jesus said because it's convenient. If they don't have to have a chronology there, then they can make it mean anything that they want. And we know it's chronological because he told us it is. I mean, not only does he give us the abomination in the middle, and he gives us the start, and he gives us the end, it's that he uses the word then. And that's the word tota. And it's a lot like ahi in Revelation for the chronology word for and, to give you a sequence of events. So tota is the then, it is the when, and then this happens, and then this happens. And you can't change the meaning because you don't like it. Or you can, but to me, you're reinventing what it says. And the other thing I would encourage people to watch for is if they're having to reinvent Scripture, that's a problem. And if they're having to leave out inconvenient Scripture, that's a problem. So everything has to fit. So that's how I sort of figured out, how to do it. And people can judge for themselves whether they think it makes sense or not, but you'll understand how I got there, and that I think they're good disciplines to have no matter what you end up on. And we're never going to agree 100% on everything, because I don't think that's possible, and there's so much to know. But once you get into the approach, and I also add in getting into the Greek and the Hebrew so that you can understand the difference between tribulation and wrath in the New Testament, and tribulation and wrath in the Old Testament. And I show you all of the words, and I show you the verses, and I show you that they're two different things, and that helps you fit with the chronology and connecting passages. So once you get that framework down, what I found was it doesn't matter if I had missed a passage. I used to live in fear, if I missed one, then it's going to just prove everything wrong. What I've found is it just fits. If you missed one, it just fits. And so it's an approach. If you're tired of conflicts, maybe give it a look, because that's what I try and take out. And hopefully that people will take some of my research and develop it further, and we can get better pictures going forward. So I can't show all of prophecy in one section. There's just too much there, but I can give you a demonstration of it, and then book 3 will do some more of that.
Amen, and I totally agree. We very much look forward to that, and thank you so much for joining us yet again, Gary. I really appreciate your time and your research, and I really think that this book is going to have a huge impact on a lot of people. Thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Anytime. And thank all of you at home for joining us and being members of Daily Renegade. Until next time, love you all, take care, and God bless.